Chapter 478. Excuse me, where is the nearest theater from here? A handsome young man with red lips and white teeth stopped a passerby on the street and asked timidly. Theater? The passerby waved his hand and said, What theater? I've never heard of it. Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. After asking a few people in a row, they all got the same answer. The young man walked to the side of the young master and said, Miss, everything is fine in Qing and Fu. Why did we come to the capital? The young master glanced at him and said, Everyone has left. What's the point of keeping us in Qing and Fu? You don't even know how to cook. We'll starve to death sooner or later. If I don't know how to cook, I can buy it outside. The young man stuck out his tongue and showed a very feminine expression. He said in a small voice, Miss, you've learned for so long and still haven't learned anything? You're a servant girl. If you don't cook, do you want me to do it myself? The young master knocked on his head again. Let's find the nearest brothel first. I don't know how they've been in the capital these days. The young man covered his head and asked the next passerby with a wronged expression. What's wrong? What's wrong with fifth young master? Are you blind? You don't even know the young master? It's your good fortune to have you follow him. Don't be so ungrateful. The servant in green glared at the young man who was spitting spittle and dressed like him. Just as he was about to explode, the man behind him pulled him back. The man laughed foolishly and said, we are servants. It's the same no matter who we serve. Since the young master has a use for us, how can we refuse? You're quite observant. The young man looked at the man with admiration and shoved the large pile of things in his hands at him. He said, Hurry up and follow. The man chuckled and said to his companion in green, I'll just follow the young master. You go back and deliver the things to fifth young master. Be careful not to get back late and the young master will blame you. Looking at the back of the man leaving, the servant in green was moved. Although Wu Er was a little silly and a little gluttonous, he was a very loyal person. He could always be relied on at critical moments. At worst, he would sacrifice his body tonight and get 2 chickens from the fat kitchen maid. That would be his way of repaying him. Thinking of the fat chef, he licked his lips, and a trace of reminiscence appeared on his face. Then, he turned around and strode away. The arrogant young man was now walking next to another young man and said with a flattering face, Young master, there is a new jade courtyard in the capital. I heard that the girls there are not bad. Should we go take a look? Seeing that the young master did not speak and was sizing up the passers-by on the street, the young man groaned inwardly. As a servant, he naturally knew the young master's hobbies. But now was a special time, and the Prime Minister had personally issued an order. If the young master caused any more trouble, not only would he be punished, but the servants would also not be able to escape punishment. Qin Yu's gaze had already rested on a young woman with an exquisite figure for a long time. Just as a pensive expression appeared on his face, a gentle voice suddenly came from beside him. Excuse me, do you know how to get to the nearest brothel? Having his train of thought interrupted, Qin Yu frowned and looked at the young man. After a moment, his gaze slightly narrowed and a playful expression appeared on his face. It was interesting for a woman to disguise as a man. Looking at her current handsome appearance, her true appearance should not be too bad. Go to the side, don't block the way. Without waiting for Qin Yu to say anything, the young man impatiently pushed the young man's shoulder. The young man's body staggered and fell to the ground, accidentally messing up his hair. The young man's expression froze and he said in surprise, A woman? Not far away, the young master hurriedly ran over and helped her up. He asked with concern, What's wrong? Are you hurt? The young man stood up in a panic, tied up his hair, and said with grievance, I just wanted to ask for directions, and he pushed me. Qin Yu looked at the woman who was also dressed as a man, and the playful expression on his face deepened. At this moment, he had forgotten about the young woman from before. After being grounded at home for nearly half a year and being strictly disciplined these days, he had long been unable to control some kind of desire. He glanced at the young man. After a moment of shock, the young man immediately understood and hurriedly said with a smile, Sorry, it was my fault just now. You two aren't from the capital, right? You want to find the nearest brothel here? It's a piece of cake, we'll take you there. There's no need, we already know the way. The slightly older woman who was dressed as a man had seen all kinds of people, so how could she not know what they wanted to do? They were unfamiliar with the capital, and judging from the other party's attire, they were obviously of extraordinary status and could not be entangled. At this moment, the young man hurriedly blocked in front of them and said, Hey, don't rush. This is your first time in the capital, so you're unfamiliar with the people and the place. If you meet any bad people, it's better if we take you there. The passers-by looked at them with disdain and hurriedly walked away. Bad people? Young Duke Qin, who dared to rob people on the street, was the biggest bad person in the capital. However, people had always heard that he liked to steal other people's wives. Since when did he become interested in these handsome young men? The two men behind Qin Yu also playfully stood out and blocked the way of the two people. The young man's expression slightly changed. He never thought that under the broad daylight of the capital, under the foot of the emperor, such a thing would happen. No one, including Qin Yu, noticed that behind them, there was a man with a lot of bags hanging on his body. He had an extremely surprised expression on his face. Miss Xiao Cui. He murmured in a low voice. When he looked at the young man again, he had already guessed his identity. Wu Er's face showed a trace of hesitation. His fists hidden under his sleeves were tightly clenched, and his breathing was slightly heavy. It seemed that he was thinking about something. After pondering for a while, he sighed and looked at Qin Yu with an ominous glint in his eyes. Suddenly, a thunderous voice suddenly exploded in everyone's ears. Hey, in broad daylight, under the clear sky, under the foot of the emperor, you dare to do such a despicable thing. Do you still have eyes for the law? Qin Yu didn't even have time to react. In front of his eyes, a fist suddenly enlarged, and then he felt an intense pain. His whole body flew 20 feet away, and under this punch, he immediately fainted. Wu Er's face showed a surprised expression, and the fist in his sleeves slowly loosened. The young man and the delicate young man were also stunned, and they couldn't come back to their senses for a long time. The people on the street were even more shocked. Where did this hothead come from? He even dared to hit young Duke Qin. Did he not want to live? Qin Yu's two guards finally reacted. A trace of panic flashed on their faces, but they quickly regained their composure. They angrily pounced on the man who had appeared on the scene. Several banging sounds were heard. This man's skill was surprisingly good. In just a few breaths of time, the two of them were knocked down to the ground, unable to get up again. Who are you? The young man's body trembled, and he looked at the man in fear. Hearing this, a trace of joy flashed across the man's face. He immediately said in a loud voice, Listen up, I am Xuanzhou's Jing Mian, ranked 23rd on the hero ranking. I saw injustice on the road, so I lent a hand. If you want revenge, come find me. They didn't know if it was an illusion, but at this moment, a strange thought suddenly surged in the hearts of countless passers-by. From beginning to end, this man beat up young Duke Qin on the street. It seemed like his motive was not to see injustice, but to shout out the words he had just said. If he only wanted to make a name for himself, then he had indeed done it. There were countless people in the capital who didn't like young Duke Qin, but the only one who dared to treat him like this on the street was this man in front of them. Hero, you'd better leave quickly. The person you just beat up is young Duke Qin. His grandfather is the current prime minister. A passerby who was hiding in the crowd kindly reminded him. What? Hearing this, the man named Jing Mian's expression changed greatly. The prime minister's grandson? Chapter 479. The man, who had a righteous expression on his face, froze on the spot when he heard the kind reminder from a passerby. The reason why he taught this playboy a lesson on the street was because he wanted to make a name for himself so that he could be ranked on the chivalry ranking. Who would have thought that this person was the grandson of the prime minister? This seemed to be a little different from his original plan. Hero, you'd better run. You can't fight against the Qin family in the capital. Young Duke Qin, who had always been arrogant and had no regard for the law, was the scourge of the capital. Seeing him being beaten up on the street, the crowd only felt happy in their hearts. They also had a good impression of the swordsman named Jing Mian, so they kindly reminded him again. Because there were already many people gathered here, no one could hear them if they spoke in the crowd. Looks like I can't stay in the capital anymore. The man secretly cursed his bad luck. He couldn't afford to offend anyone on the street in this King capital. He wanted to pay a visit to the famous heroine Lu. If he was lucky enough to join the Lu Alliance, that would be great. But now, it seemed that he had to prepare to run on his first day in the capital. However, he would offend either way, so he might as well let him vent his anger. The man scratched his head and thought about it. He felt that this was right. If he couldn't stay in the capital, he could go to Qing and prefecture. So what if it's Prime Minister Qin? Can the Prime Minister's grandson be lawless? The man snorted coldly. With a face full of righteousness, he said loudly, "This is the capital, under the feet of the emperor. Since someone is using his power to bully others, I will let him know the consequences of using his power to bully others." The burly man kicked Qin Yu on the ground like a ragged sack. After a series of punches and kicks, he laughed and said, "Remember my name well. I am Zheng Mian of Xianzhou, ranked 23rd on the Hero Earth ranking." After he finished speaking, he quickly flashed into the crowd and soon disappeared. Hero, he knew that the Qin family was powerful, but he still offended young Duke Qin. In the hearts of the crowd, they no longer thought of him as a brute. He was a true hero, worthy of the name of a hero. They immediately felt deep respect for him. Zheng Mian of Xianzhou, they silently remembered this name in their hearts. The officials always appeared a long time after they were supposed to appear. Seeing little Duke Qin covered in wounds, they naturally didn't dare to be negligent. A few people immediately went to find the culprit, and another person was sent to inform Qin Manor as soon as possible. The rest of the people carried little Duke Qin and ran to the nearest medical center. "The place you're looking for, just follow this road all the way, and you'll find the second hostel." The man named Wu'er followed behind them. When he passed by the woman dressed as a man, he whispered something to her. The young woman dressed in men's clothing watched as the burly man quickly left. The surrounding people began to turn their gazes to them. She immediately took the youth beside her and left. Only when their figures disappeared did everyone retract their gazes and began to discuss in whispers. "Sigh, that hero sure has guts. Other than Li Xianzi, only this hero dares to treat Duke Qin like this in the capital." To tell the truth, it was so King satisfying to watch just now. Say, don't tell me these noble families all know how to play? Doesn't this little Duke Qin like other people's wives? When did he become interested in such a handsome young master? Those are clearly two Xiaonyang's sons. Are you blind? Young Duke Qin was beaten half to death on the streets of the capital. This could truly be considered a super explosive piece of news. Even the hero named Zheng Mian became famous in the capital. There were even people who specially went to inquire about the hero ranking he spoke of and discovered that there really was such a strange ranking in a hostel outside the city. For a moment, they were interested. At that time, a number of people went out of the city together. In a newly built hostel in the city, Wan Ruoqing walked out with a tired expression. After overcoming many difficulties, the several hostel in the capital were finally on the right track. These days, she had to attend to everything personally, so she was indeed a bit tired. In front of her, two figures walked over. Wan Ruoqing stood to the side and made way for them. Suddenly, she was hugged by the young man who walked in. Her expression immediately changed. Just as she was about to speak, she felt a strange feeling from her chest. It seemed to be a bit familiar. She seemed to have thought of something and immediately looked over. "Huh, I scared you." The young man's face revealed a happy expression, but he didn't let go of her. Why are you here?" Wan Ruoqing's face showed a surprised expression as she looked at him and said. "These days, there have been many things to do in the hostel. Fortunately, you came here to help me. On the soft grass, Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo walked side by side and said with a smile. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were following behind the two of them, talking mysteriously about something. A little further away, there were several strong men following them from afar. I'm not like someone who is comfortable being a hands-off shopkeeper. Zheng Zumo curled her lips and said, this place looks good. Let's do it here. Wan Ruoqing smiled helplessly and said, it's not spring now. Why do you want to fly a kite? I've wanted to fly a kite for a long time. Zheng Zumo said with some anger, at that time, we were busy with the hostel in Qing and prefecture. You have forgotten how many times you promised me, but you didn't fulfill it even once. Today's weather is good. If I want to fly a kite, I fly it. What does it have to do with the season? But you. Wan Ruoqing looked at her, and her expression became even more helpless. She wanted to say that even if they wanted to fly a kite, there was no need to make the kite look like her. Zheng Zumo's painting skills were amazing, and she was proficient in that kind of three-dimensional painting. Her painting was very realistic. When the kite was spread on the ground, Wan Ruoqing seemed to see another version of herself. The feeling in her heart was naturally difficult to describe. I think this is very good. Xiao Chui begged me several times before I made one for her. The sun was warm today, and there was a gentle breeze. Zheng Zumo let Xiao Chui carry the strange kite. She ran for a while and easily sent the kite into the sky. Sister Ruoqing, you really flew into the sky. Xiao Zhu walked over with an envious expression. Zheng Zumo looked at the sky with some pride and said, how is it? Doesn't it look beautiful like this? After she finished speaking, she suddenly felt her hand was empty before anyone else could answer. When she looked down, she couldn't help but scream. What's wrong? Wan Ruoqing looked at her and asked curiously. Oh, I forgot to tie a knot at the back. Zheng Zumo ran forward anxiously. The kite flew away, hurry and chase after it. The men in charge of their safety saw this and looked at each other in shock, but they could only follow them to chase the kite. At this time, outside the capital, there was an ordinary minister's residence. Although it was daytime, the door was closed. There were only two gray-clothed servants outside, looking around vigilantly. In the spacious courtyard of the residence, there was a dense mass of people kneeling on the ground. There were more than 100 densely packed heads. Looking at their clothes, most of them were ordinary villagers. It was unknown why they were gathered here, but their expressions were extremely pious as they knelt on the ground, motionless. At the very front of the crowd, there was a platform that was half a foot high. A purple-clothed man sat cross-legged there, looking down at the crowd. He slowly said, after entering my holy church, as long as you are sincere and believe in the Empress will bestow good fortune upon you. She will protect you from disease and calamity, and after death, you will not fall to the ground. Now, close your eyes, I will guide you. After the man in purple finished speaking, the expressions on the faces of the people became even more pious. They closed their eyes and said loudly, thank you, envoy. After an unknown amount of time, the man in purple spoke again, the guide has been completed. From now on, you belong to the holy religion. The Empress will protect you. Now, you can open your eyes and stand up. As soon as his voice fell, the people raised their heads at the same time and slowly stood up in unison. The man in purple nodded slightly. Just as he was about to speak, there was suddenly an exclamation from below. Look, what is that? When the person at the very front pointed to the sky in the distance, everyone's eyes looked over. High up in the sky, an extremely beautiful woman was standing on the clouds, looking at them with a smile. Such a miraculous scene caused everyone's faces to reveal a look of shock. This is the spirit of the Empress. Suddenly, someone revealed an excited expression and loudly said. He kneeled on the ground again and kept kowtowing. The Empress, it's the Empress is here. Put on. Not long after, 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, 100 people, all of them kneeled on the ground, their faces solemn and solemn. They were unprecedentedly pious. The man in purple suddenly turned his head, just in time to see a figure flash in the clouds. In that instant, his pupils shrank. Chapter 480. I've finally caught it. A man in a short-sleeved shirt held one end of the string and quickly climbed up a giant tree. He untied the string and took down the kite. The girls are still waiting over there. Let's go back. The man jumped down from the tree and waved at the two people chasing him. His expression was a bit gloomy. He was supposed to protect the two girls, but he didn't expect to chase the kite for several miles. It was not as interesting as watching the competition at the brothel. On a grassy slope, Wan Ruoqing asked Xing Zumo in confusion, "Didn't you say before that you would never come to the capital in this life? The past is the past. For us, what's the difference between the capital and Qing and prefecture?" The kite flew away, and Xing Zumo was a bit dispirited. She looked at the faintly discernible walls of the capital and asked, "You've been here for a few days. Have you seen him?" "Not yet." Wan Ruoqing smiled and shook her head. "He's been busy these days." "He's been busy." Xing Zumo's tone was sour. A 30-year-old county uncle who defeated the people of the Qi kingdom in 2 competitions. He's a national hero. Even these brothels are things he does when he's bored. In the future, the distance between us and him will only grow further and further. Wan Ruoqing smiled and saw a few men walking over from not far away. They were holding the kite that had just flown away. They turned to her and said, "Aren't you going to fly a kite? Remember to tie the line this time." Xing Zumo waved her hand. "Forget it. I'm a bit tired from running and suddenly don't want to play anymore. Let's go back." Seeing her walk back the way she came, Wan Ruoqing shook her head. She said something to the people behind her and helplessly followed. In the courtyard of a minister's residence. "Great emissary, was that the Empress just now?" The Empress really did show herself. "Yes, it must be. The Empress specially sent down a miracle because of our sincerity." The purple-clothed man's eyes flickered as he looked at the excited and fanatical believers below. That mystical scene just now had given him too much of a shock. Even now, it was still stuck in his mind, unable to be erased. Could it be that the one standing in the clouds just now was really the Empress? Whether or not it was the Empress, the scene just now was undoubtedly a great help to their great cause. Those believers who were not devout enough and had doubts in their hearts had all become fanatical believers at this moment. The purple-clothed man's eyes flashed several times and his face became solemn once more. Looking at the crowd below, he slowly said, "That's right, what you saw just now was the true body of the Heavenly Empress. This is a miracle that the Heavenly Empress specially sent down to encourage you. In the future, you must sincerely worship the Heavenly Empress. If there is a chance, you may see the Heavenly Empress appear again." After learning the truth from the messenger, the crowd that had quietened down immediately burst into cheers again. Everyone saw this incredible scene with their own eyes. The Heavenly Empress stood on the clouds and looked at them. In the future, what Buddhas and immortals were there to worship? Could those Buddhas and immortals appear in front of so many people like the Heavenly Empress? "I am guilty." Suddenly, someone in the crowd knelt down and loudly wailed, "I actually doubted the Heavenly Empress just now. I ask the Empress to forgive me." Put Ong. After he knelt down, another 10 people immediately knelt down and repented for doubting the Heavenly Empress. They constantly kowtowed until blood seeped out of their foreheads. The purple-clothed man walked down from the high platform. With a face full of compassion, he said, "You do not need to be like this. The Empress is merciful and will not blame you for this. As long as you wholeheartedly work for the holy religion in the future, even your past karma will be eliminated by the Empress." Not long after, everyone with extremely pious expressions walked out of the courtyard and gradually disappeared into the surroundings of the house. In the courtyard, the purple-clothed man looked at the 2 servants and asked in a deep voice, "Where is the Empress now? There has been a change in the situation. I must immediately report to the Empress." "What?" Li Yi looked at Li Xian, who couldn't help but laugh. He asked, "What did you say? Qin Yu was beaten up?" He even dared to beat Prime Minister Qin's grandson. Just who has the guts to do so? Li Xian's guards stood at the back and looked at the two with a strange expression. All the people in the capital who had beaten up Duke Qin were standing here. You still have the nerve to ask who had the guts to do so? No. I don't know. Li Xian had been laughing since the beginning. As he laughed, he said, I heard that he was molesting on the street and was seen by a passing knight. He didn't know his identity and only thought that he was an ordinary hedonistic son of a rich family. He ruthlessly taught him a lesson on the street. I heard from the imperial physician that Qin Yu had several broken ribs. His injuries were even worse than the king of shoes. If he doesn't rest at home for a few months, he won't be able to get out of bed. What about that hero? Li Yi asked curiously. The officials searched crazily but still couldn't find him. He was just a passing knight. Even if he left his name and left the capital, how could he be caught? Li Xian calmed down a little and said, I'm afraid that Qin Yu's beating will be in vain. Li Yi nodded and said, that hero did a good job. I still don't know his name. I have to ask around. How can one not be famous when doing good deeds? After Li Xian had laughed enough, he put the matter of Qin Yu to the back of his mind. He said, the third prince of the Qi kingdom has left, but the Wushu examination will still be held. The date has been chosen. Do you want to go and have a look? I'll see. I don't understand things like battle formations. I don't know much about the 6 stratagems, the 3 stratagems, and Sun Tzu's art of war. Li Yi thought for a while and said, I heard that there will be a martial arts competition between the experts of the Qi kingdom. It should be interesting. When will the competition be held? Li Xian shook his head and said, what's 6 stratagems, 3 stratagems, and Sun Tzu's art of war? What are you talking about? Are you sure you've learned the art of war? Li Yi looked at him and asked curiously, you didn't learn the art of war from a scholar, did you? Not to mention the first 2, he hadn't even heard of Sun Tzu's art of war. Li Yi was willing to bet that if Li Xian hadn't skipped classes, he would have taken his surname. My art of war was taught by General Shui. Li Xian looked at him and said seriously, now tell me, what are the 6 stratagems, 3 stratagems, and Sun Tzu's art of war? Looking at Li Xian's expression, Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He finally realized something. Damn it, I was careless. A look of astonishment appeared on Li Yi's face. He said, what 3 stratagems, 6 stratagems? What are you talking about? I don't understand. He stood up from the chair and shouted toward the door, Xiao Huan, see the guest out. Chapter 481. Hearing the son-in-law call for her, the servant girl hurriedly ran in. Not long after, she walked out again, somewhat baffled. Where did this book on the art of war come from? Li Xian looked at Li Yi and asked in astonishment. When it came to history, he might have a headache, but when it came to the art of war, even though he had never personally practiced it, his theoretical knowledge was extremely abundant. Thinking back, he studied together with more than 10 princes and descendants of generals, but old General Shui was the most strict with him. If he made the slightest mistake, he would be heavily punished. This directly caused his grades in the art of war to be even higher than those descendants of generals. Even though it could not be said that he was familiar with all the books on the art of war in this world, there were still many that he had not even heard of. Since he had already aroused Li Xian's curiosity, this matter could not be brushed aside. Li Yi sighed and said, this is a long story. It was another bitter winter? Li Xian felt that this routine was somewhat familiar and blurted out. No. Li Yi shook his head and said, it was a scorching summer, even hotter than this year. One day at noon. Li Xian looked at him and asked, then that old man left you a few books on the art of war? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, if you don't believe me, I can change the story. How about changing the background to winter? Li Xian nodded and said, let's go with winter. It was the coldest day of the year, and the snow blocked the mountains. The old man, under the pressure of hunger and cold, collapsed at your doorstep. Later, to thank you for saving his life, he gave you such an important thing, this would be easier to believe. After the last 2 rounds, Li Xian had a deeper understanding that Li Yi had read many books. That was why his mind always had so many strange ideas. He could compose poems, understand the meaning of the scriptures, and know that stones fell at the same time, even if he said that he really knew the art of war. What was so strange about that? Li Xian looked at him again and said, "The first round of the combat examination is the deduction of battle formations. The combat examination is different from the written examination. We can't let those famous old generals personally participate, so we have come to an agreement with the Qi kingdom. Those participating in the combat examination must be of the younger generation. The second generation of the family of generals are all over 30 years old and do not meet the requirements. The youngest generation is about the same age as us, and there are not many who have participated in battle." Li Yi seemed to have understood something. He looked at him in surprise and asked, "It can't be that you want to participate, right?" Li Xian sighed and said, "I don't want to either, but old General Shuai said that I won the written examination. If I were to lose in the combat examination, those old fellows would lose face and say that I'm stronger than those useless fellows from their family. Are you sure that reading these things will help?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Which great general learned this from reading military books?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "There's no need to participate in battle this time. I think that since the people of the Qi kingdom are so confident, their opponents must not be simple. It's better to read than not." Since Li Xian had already said so, Li Yi couldn't refuse anymore. Sun Tzu's Art of War and 36 Stratagems should be 2 of the most famous military books in the future. Their contents were concise and concise. Even with the addition of 6 stratagems and 3 stratagems, it would only be a little over 20,000 words. He would write them down for him and let him slowly ponder over them when he got back. "Xiao Huan, come in and grind the ink." Seeing Li Yi take out a brush and ink, Li Xian hurriedly called out to the door. "Grind it yourself." Li Yi glanced at him and said impatiently. This fellow, he really didn't treat himself as an outsider anymore. The little servant girl poked her head in from outside the door. Seeing that the crown prince had yet to leave, she curled her lips in dissatisfaction. The son-in-law had promised to teach her how to use the flower-flipping rope in a while, but she didn't know how long she would have to wait. The art of war is the art of deception. Good. Li Xian already had a deep knowledge of the art of war. As he grinded the ink, he watched Li Yi write. When he saw a certain part, he couldn't help but praise it. But after a moment, he frowned and said, "Sun Tzu's Art of War, why is it called Sun Tzu's Art of War? Isn't this just cursing yourself?" He still thought that there was no such thing as a snowy day or an old man who fainted in front of Li Yi's house. As for why Li Yi named this book Sun Tzu's Art of War, he showed great confusion. "Then what do you think it should be called?" Li Yi asked casually. In another world, the author of Sun Tzu's Art of War was General Sun Wu of the Wu Kingdom during the spring and autumn period. It wasn't clear if Sun Wu existed in this world, but Sun Tzu's Art of War definitely didn't exist. In this way, this name didn't have any meaning and would instead make people feel strange. "I think." Li Xian looked at the content on the paper and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he pointed to a certain place on the paper and said, "This character is wrong." Looking at the place he pointed at, Li Yi realized that he had written too hastily just now. He subconsciously wrote a simplified character, made a cross on it, and wrote the characters that were commonly used in this world. Li Xian nodded and said, "Since this is done by the 2 of us together, why don't we call it Li's Art of War?" The pen in Li Yi's hand paused. He looked up at him with an incredulous expression and asked, "Done together?" Li Xian nodded, pointed to the place just now, and said, "I pointed out that you made a mistake." After saying that, he seemed to feel that it was a little inappropriate, so he thought for a moment and said, "Of course, your contribution is greater, so your name can be written at the front." After being stunned, Li Yi stood up from the chair. "Finished writing?" Li Xian looked at him and asked. "No." Li Yi shook his head, handed over the pen in his hand, and said, "Here's the pen, you write." "Son-in-law, what's wrong?" While teaching the little servant girl how to flip the flower rope, Li Yi let out a long sigh. causing her to blink her big eyes and ask curiously. I don't know where you learned this from, but how did you become so shameless now? Li Yi was filled with emotion. Thinking back to the first time he met the crown prince, he was so upright, so pure, but now? Before long, the generals of the Jing kingdom and His Majesty the Emperor would be able to see Li's art of war. Plum's 36 stratagems, Plum's 6 strategies, Plum's 3 strategies, how to make plums taste good, 128 ways to cook sugar-roasted chestnuts, and so on. Thousands of years later, when people were studying the ancient military cultural heritage and an important part of the excellent traditional culture, Li Zi's works collection, they might also be able to imagine that in July of the second year of Jinghe, a famous poet, thinker, educator, writer, playwright, inventor, and military strategist of the kingdom of Jinghe single-handedly pushed forward the big event that had been controversial for nearly 1,000 years and opened the prelude to a new era. He was known as one of the top 10 people who had influenced the world since ancient times. He was most likely a time traveler, and another person who was also famous throughout the ages. What kind of clash of ideas did these two great initiators have to write such a masterpiece that has been passed down for thousands of years? Of course, experts in this field would also discuss why there was a book called How to Make Plums Well in a Plum Works collection, and why the book 128 Ways to Make Sugar-Roasted Chestnuts was not sugar-roasted plums. Furthermore, the book didn't really record 128 ways to make sugar-roasted chestnuts. Was this an oversight by the two authors, or was it an omission in the book during the process of circulation? The flower rope is new, it becomes a scarf, the scarf is broken, the thread is loose, the thread is messy. In July of the second year of Jinghe, when the little maidservant wrapped a silk thread around her finger, she went to find a few of her close friends to play this new game she had just learned. She would never have thought that whether the flower-flipping rope was created by the maidservant of the great man's family would become a controversial issue thousands of years later. Chapter 482. The beautiful scenery of the West Lake, the sky in March, the spring rain is like wine, the willows are like smoke. Fifth Master was very happy today, at least that was what Wu thought. From the words he sang, it could be seen that he had gone to the brothel to watch a play. It was The Legend of the White Snake that was popular in Jing recently. He had known this song for a long time. In that play, he liked the weird green snake the most and didn't have a good impression of the effeminate Su Xian. But today, the beautiful scenery of the West Lake was not important, and the play was also not important. What was important was that Fifth Master was not going to urge the government to quickly arrest the villain who had injured the little duke. How could he have the free time to watch a play at the brothel? Could it be that he was very happy to see the little duke lying on the bed wrapped up like a dumpling? Thinking of a rumor that had been circulating among the servants in the manor, Wu Er's expression gradually became strange. Wu Er. Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly heard Fifth Master Qin call his name. Wu Er quickly said, "Fifth Master, what are your orders?" "I heard that you were there when the young master was beaten up that day." Fifth Master Qin walked over, bringing with him a strong smell of alcohol. Wu Er quickly said, "I was indeed there at the time, but Fifth Master, it's not that I didn't help the young master, it's that the villain was too powerful, and I couldn't beat him." Fifth Master Qin waved his hand and said, "I don't blame you. Come, tell me in detail what happened that day." Wu Er looked at Fifth Master Qin, and his eyes flashed a few times, but his face showed an honest expression. He said, yes, that day was like this, miss. Today, the government came again to ask about hero Jing Mian. Should we temporarily remove his name from the hero ranking? Old Man's son looked at Wan Ruoqing and asked with furrowed brows. No need. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "We have nothing to do with hero Jing Mian. That matter is being spread all over Jing. What's more, the hero ranking has recently been handled by that Mississippi Lu, so it's not good for us to say anything." Then all right. Old Man's son sighed and said. The capital was not like Qing and prefecture. The hedonistic young masters in the city were not so easily taught a lesson. These heroes had no ties and could no longer stay in the capital. At most, they would move to another place to continue their freedom. In any case, their brothels had already infiltrated many states and counties. These lists were also common. However, the officials could not catch those people, but they would focus some of their attention on them. Old Man Sun felt that their foundation was still shallow. Within the capital, they still had to be careful. The hero ranking board was almost completely separated from the brothel. Even though the brothel still needed to advertise it, it was no longer something he could interfere with. However, since Miss Wan said there was no need, he didn't think about it anymore. He told her about the recent situation in the brothel and soon left. Xiao Chui was running in the yard with a small kite in her hand. The kite was made for her by her young miss, and there was a portrait of her on it. Unfortunately, the yard was too small, and she had to turn back after running for a dozen steps. The kite could only fly over the roof, which made her a little depressed. However, she quite liked this secluded little courtyard. Even though it was a little small for flying a kite, it was actually more than twice the size of the place they lived in when they were in Qing and Prefecture. According to Xiao Zhu, this was a yard that only the senior members of the brothel could have. Thinking of Xiao Zhu's proud expression at that time, she suddenly felt a little indignant. Miss Wan was indeed a senior member of the brothel, but her young miss was also considered one. Her young miss had also worked hard and sweated for the brothel. Even though she was not as good as Miss Wan had been seen by that person. In short, it shouldn't be too much for her young miss to have such a small yard, right? Of course, the yard couldn't be too far away from here. Otherwise, it would be inconvenient for the two of them to come over to eat. When she was thinking about this, she was naturally a little distracted. Her movements slowed, and the kite fell from the sky and hit the head of a figure walking in from outside. Li Yi touched his head and took a deep breath. Then, he looked at the smiling young girl lying on the ground with a stunned expression. I arrived here the day before yesterday. Xiao Chui held the kite and followed behind Li Yi with her head down. She didn't dare to look up at him. Where is your young miss? Li Yi rubbed the place that was hit and asked as he walked. Young miss is painting in the room. Young miss didn't like to be disturbed when she was painting. Xiao Chui said in a low voice. Then, she walked to a room and gently knocked on the door, saying, Young miss, Li. Come in, Xiao Chui. Before Xiao Chui could finish, Zhang Zumo's voice came from inside. Oh. Xiao Chui looked at Li Yi and said, You can go in by yourself. Young miss often complained that Li never cared about the brothel, which was why Miss Wan was so tired. She might be angry if she saw him, so she planned to stay away for a while. Li Yi nodded and pushed the door in, thinking that he must keep the goddess of Luo Shui here this time. She could paint, sing, and know how to create hype. Such a talent was hard to find. He stepped into the room and looked up ahead. He saw a smooth and flawless jade back. Zhang Zumo's back was facing him, and her two hands struggled to reach behind her. She didn't look back and said, Xiao Chui, you came at the right time. Help me tie my dudu from the back. Li Yi's expression changed. He felt that the friendship that he had built up with great difficulty was about to capsize again. Seeing that there was no movement behind her, Zhang Zumo turned around and frowned. Hurry up, what are you waiting for? The expression on her face froze, and the words she wanted to say were stuck in her throat. Such a familiar person, such a familiar scene. The difference was that last time, she was naked, but this time, she was covered by a pink dudu. But for some reason, this made her feel even more ashamed. Li Yi closed his eyes and said helplessly, Well, it's better. You tie it yourself. The girl squatted in the corridor outside the door, wondering why there was no movement inside. The next moment, an ear-piercing voice full of anger came from the room. Xiao Chui. The young miss was indeed very angry, but she couldn't be blamed. She was obviously angry at Li. Why did she call her name? She stood up reluctantly and walked into the room. Seeing the young miss looking at her as if she wanted to eat her, and then looking at her clothes, she immediately realized something and screamed and ran out of the door. Young miss, you let me in. You can't blame me for this. Not long after, the two sat in the corridor. Li Yi looked back at the door that had been closed from the beginning. He stuffed a piece of osmanthus cake that he had stolen from the kitchen into his mouth and handed the remaining piece to the girl next to him. He asked, "Do you want one?" Chapter 483. Thank you, but no. The girl named Xiao Chui shook her head. She was not like the young miss who could never get tired of eating osmanthus cake. Li Yi breathed a sigh of relief and threw the last piece into his mouth with peace of mind. "What should I do?" the girl said with a bitter face. She could already foresee what kind of storm she would face next. She couldn't help but worry. Li Yi shrugged, indicating that he was also helpless. Although it seemed like he was taking advantage of the situation, he was able to encounter such a thing every time. Could it be considered fate arranged by God? The heavens were really kind to him. Seeing her frown, Li Yi comforted her. "Don't worry, I will explain to your young miss later. I won't let her make things difficult for you." Although in today's era, the etiquette between men and women was very strict. Not to mention being seen on the back, even if one accidentally saw a woman's feet, a stubborn chaste woman might turn around and jump into a well. However, it wasn't like he hadn't seen more exciting things before. It shouldn't be a big deal at this level. Xiao Chui glanced at him. She didn't show a relaxed expression because of the comfort just now. Of course, the young miss wouldn't make things difficult for her. Last time in the Jade Courtyard, it was already like that, and the young miss didn't scold her much. As for Li himself, it was better to pray for more luck. As if hearing the movement in the courtyard, Ruoqing walked out of the room and saw Li Yi and Xiao Chui sitting side by side in the corridor opposite. They were also holding their cheeks with one hand and had a bitter expression. For a moment, she was stunned. In the room, Tsing Zumo had already put on her clothes and buried her head deep in the quilt. Thinking of how she was seen wearing her underwear, her breathing became a little short, and her cheeks began to blush. Other than that, there was nothing else. She suddenly sat up from the bed, touched her chest, and found that her heartbeat didn't speed up. The expression on her face was startled. After carefully feeling it, her expression began to change. She took out a small mirror from the corner of the bed. After looking at it, she gritted her teeth and said hatefully, Tsing Zumo, are you really a shameless woman? You stay here for a while. I will go make some osmanthus cakes. We will take them with us when we leave." Seeing that Li Yi even ate the crumbs of the osmanthus cake in his hand, Wan Ruoqing smiled and said softly, then walked to the kitchen. Because he had to explain to Tsing Zumo later, Li Yi decided to stay here for a while. If Tsing Zumo still didn't come out when the osmanthus cake was ready, he would knock on the door. As he was thinking about this, he suddenly heard the sound of the door opening behind him. He turned around and saw that the closed door had been opened, but Tsing Zumo hadn't come out. Xiao Chui pouted her lips at him and hid a little further away, meaning that he should solve his own problems by himself. Xiao of Xiao 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 Li, Xiao 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 Chui Xiao Xiao and of Xiao Xiao. Xiao and Xiao of Xiao Xiao Xiao. When Li Yi walked into the room, he saw Tsing Zumo sitting on the side of the bed facing him. She didn't have scissors or vase in her hand. He was relieved. Li Yi walked into the room and saw Tsing Zumo sitting on the side of the bed facing him. She wasn't holding scissors or a vase in her hand. He was relieved. Misunderstanding. I swear, this time is the same as last time. It is still a misunderstanding. He walked over and said sincerely. Tsing Zumo had finally calmed down. When she heard him say, last time, some images appeared in her mind. Her cheeks once again flushed unnaturally, and her chest heaved up and down slightly. Li Yi saw that she seemed to be about to explode. He seemed to have thought of something and immediately said, no, this time is different from last time. This time, there is a dudu, shut up. Tsing Zumo finally couldn't take it anymore. She stood up abruptly and said, get out, I don't want to see you now. Really, I only saw that pink dudu. I really didn't see anything else. Of course, Li Yi couldn't leave now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself in the future. This thought changed the next moment because she saw the goddess began to look around, obviously looking for something. When her gaze swept across the huge vase on the stool, her eyes obviously lit up. Li Yi raised his leg and walked outside, muttering softly, "I really only saw the dudu, get out." Tseng Zumo finally couldn't help but yell. Outside the door, the little servant girl sitting in the corridor shivered. Her face was full of worry. "It's over." She even said, "Get out." This time, the young lady was probably really angry. What's so great about a dudu? Although it is comfortable to wear, it will droop after a few years. It doesn't shape at all. The effect is far worse than a bra. Li Yi muttered again and was about to walk out of the room. "Wait." Hearing the voice behind him, Li Yi stopped in his tracks. He saw Tseng Zumo standing by the bed, looking at him with a murderous expression. He gritted his teeth and said, "Come back." After being stunned for a moment, he didn't go back. Instead, he walked faster. Looking at her now, only an idiot would go back. Maybe she was hiding a pair of scissors in her sleeves, ready to die with him. The servant girl named Xiao Chui stood up from the stairs and decided to see what was going on in the room. The next moment, she saw Li walk out of the room quickly. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he was dragged in by his young lady. Then, the door closed tightly, and there was no more sound coming from inside. She grew up in a brothel. Although she hadn't had sex yet, she knew what she should and shouldn't know. Looking at the closed door, an expression of disbelief appeared on the young lady's face. After a moment, she came back to her senses and tiptoed to the door. She put her ear to the door, and her eyes kept moving. "Here, it looks like this." Li Yi put down the brush and pointed at the two bowl-shaped objects on the scroll. If there was no previous foreshadowing, Tseng Zumo naturally wouldn't think of other aspects. However, at this moment, her face was red. She glared at Li Yi and scolded, "Shameless." Then, she looked at him with suspicion on her pretty face and asked, "This thing really works?" "Try it and you'll know," Li Yi said. Whether it was useful or not, he would only know after using it. There must be a reason why women's underwear in ancient times was replaced by bras in modern times. "Bah! I'll show you who wants to try it." Tseng Zumo glared at him fiercely and quickly hid the painting under the other paintings. "Shameless." She glared at Li Yi again and gritted her teeth. Li Yi glared at her. Since when did he have this intention? Thinking that an angry woman's IQ was 0, he didn't want to argue with her. He decided to hide for now and wait for her to calm down. He quickly walked outside. When he reached the door, he turned around and said seriously, "Actually, to be honest, pink doesn't really suit you." A trace of confusion appeared on Tseng Zumo's face at first, but the next moment, she realized what he was referring to. Her pretty face instantly turned bright red. She grabbed the pillow on the bed and threw it at him. "Get out." The door suddenly opened. Xiao Chui's face was still pressed against the door. She lost her support and fell into the room. Bang! Although the pillow was very soft, it was still a bit dazed when it hit her head. Xiao Chui climbed up from the ground, holding the pillow in her hand. She looked at her mistress, and then at a certain person whose figure had already disappeared. Chapter 484. In the small courtyard, Wan Ruoqing watched Li Yi run over quickly and take away the food box in her hand. After saying, "Thank you," her figure flashed again and disappeared outside the door. What's going on? Her face was full of surprise. After looking at the door for a long time, she shook her head and walked to Tseng Zumo's room. "Miss, I didn't know." Xiao Chui hugged the pillow, turned around, looked at Tseng Zumo, and said pitifully. Seeing her raise her hand, she immediately picked up the pillow to cover her head and quickly said, "I'm sorry, miss, I didn't mean to. I didn't know you were changing clothes. What's wrong with Xiao Chui?" Wan Ruoqing walked in from outside and saw her with the pillow on her head. Tseng Zumo's hand didn't fall on her head. After glaring at the girl, she said, "Nothing. Xiao Chui, you go out first. I have something to say to Sister Ruoqing." "Oh." The girl, who knew she had sinned deeply, responded, walked out with the pillow on her head, and didn't forget to close the door. "Did Xiao Chui make you angry again?" Wan Ruoqing looked at her and asked with a smile. She knew that Xiao Chui's mind was a bit muddle-headed and would often do some things that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. However, Xing Zumo and her were sisters in name. Most of the time, she just scared her, and in fact, she wouldn't punish her. "Let's not talk about this." Xing Zumo shook her head. No matter how close she was to Wan Ruoqing, she couldn't know what just happened. She looked in the direction of the door and said mysteriously, "Come here, I'll show you something." Seeing her take out another painting from under a few paintings like a thief, Wan Ruoqing took a look and wondered, "What is this?" Xing Zumo leaned close to her ear and said a few words with a blushing face. Wan Ruoqing was stunned, and her neck was also covered with a layer of pink. She said, How did you think of this? How are you going to wear this out?" "Isn't it? Of course I won't wear it." Xing Zumo pouted and said, "But there are no outsiders at home. It's not like you don't know how hard it is to wear a corset all day. If this continues for a few years, it will, but us women, aren't we all like this?" Wan Ruoqing's face was still pink. "Why should we women be like this?" Xing Zumo raised her eyebrows and said, "At that time, what kind of woman are we? It is because we are women that we need to know how to protect ourselves." When Xing Zumo began to say this, she thought that it was Li Yi who was a man who had said these words. She felt a little strange. After she repeated those words, she realized that she had been convinced by herself. This was something that benefited all the women in the world. As a woman, what was there for her to be embarrassed about? Will it really work? Wan Ruoqing's face was a little less shy as she looked at her and asked. "We'll know after we try." Speaking of this, Xing Zumo's expression was a little unnatural as she gritted her teeth. Wan Ruoqing thought about it and said, "If you like it, then do it." In addition to those entertainment programs, the brothel also had a lot of businesses. Although most of them were arranged by Li Yi, she had always been in control of the overall situation. She was also a little tempted by what Xing Zumo had said. If what she said was true, it could be imagined that this new type of underwear would be very popular, even surpassing today's perfume. However, who are we going to sell it to? I'm afraid the women in the capital won't accept it immediately. A mysterious smile appeared on Xing Zumo's face and she said, "You don't have to worry about this." The jadeite brothel had moved to the capital. As long as she told the brothel keeper that the girls wearing these new underwear could attract more customers, she was willing to provide a dozen pieces for free for the sake of their past friendship. Wouldn't the brothel keeper, who had always valued money more than her life, go crazy? At that time, she could spread the news that the jadeite brothel had a treasure to attract customers. Those brothel keepers from the Manshan brothel, Golden Phoenix brothel, and Swallow's brothel would all come knocking. It had to be said that this kind of underwear was much more tempting to men than the underwear. When those men who frequented brothels got used to this new type of underwear, if they knew there was such a shop in the capital, they would urge their wives and concubines to buy it. Everything else would follow naturally. When Wan Ruoqing walked out of Xing Zumo's room, Xiao Chui walked into the room with a pillow in her arms. She saw Wan Ruoqing sitting at the head of the bed, folding up her favorite pink underwear and putting it in a box. Her expression was slightly stunned. Teaching Xiao Huan how to play the flower-flipping rope was a mistake. In just one day, all the maids in the house had learned this new game. Whenever they had free time, they would get together in twos or threes and play happily with the silk thread in their hands. The few fallen leaves in the courtyard had already been there for an hour. This was blatant laziness. Li Yi began to reflect. Other maids, if they were just a little bit lazy, they would be beaten and scolded, and if they were serious, they would be indescribable. Had he been too lenient with them before? Hee, I won again. The maid named Xiao Qing had a proud expression on her face. She was now the best at playing the flower-flipping rope in the entire count's residence, other than Miss Xiao Huan. Just now, even Xiao He, who was the first to learn this game, was defeated by her. Xiao Qing is pretty good. The voice that came from behind made the few maids jump in fright. When they turned around and saw that it was their Lord Zhu, they immediately felt relieved. Everyone knew that in the entire residence, the strictest person was Butler Li, and the one who treated the servants the best and the most gentle was Lord Zhu. Not only did he give them an increase in their allowance, he even taught them how to play the game. It was not that they were bragging, but in the entire capital, there was no other master like him. If there was a popularity poll in the residence, Lord Zhu would definitely be in first place, and Butler Li would definitely be in last place. It's all because Miss Xiao Huan taught us well, the maid named Xiao Qing said with some embarrassment. She actually knew how to use a roundabout strategy to please Xiao Huan. Li Yi smiled and said, since Xiao Qing's flower flipping rope is so good, then this month's allowance. The maid was stunned for a moment when she heard this. Her face lit up, and her eyes immediately turned into crescent moons. When the other servant girls saw this, they all revealed expressions of envy and regret. They were envious because little Qing's monthly allowance was going to increase again, and regretful because if they knew that flipping flower ropes could also increase their monthly allowance, they would have worked hard to learn it. Since Xiao Qing's flower flipping rope is so good, then this month's allowance will be reduced by half. Li Yi smiled at the maids and said, and you guys, this month's allowance will be reduced by half. If you are so lazy next time, it will all be deducted. Thank. Little Qing was halfway through her sentence when her eyes suddenly widened. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. When he saw the maid's expressions freeze and stand dumbly on the spot, Li Yi walked back to his room with his hands behind his back. Although he did not like the lifeless atmosphere in the house, he still needed to maintain his dignity when necessary. When he walked down the corridor, he coincidentally bumped into Mississippi Lu, who was coming out of her room. I'm going to the brothel. Don't wait for me for dinner, Mississippi Lu said plainly and quickly walked outside. Wait, I'm going too. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, then he immediately turned and followed her. Recently, Mississippi Lu's behavior was extremely abnormal. She left early in the morning and returned late at night. He did not know what she was busy with outside. The 17-year-old Mississippi Lu was in her rebellious phase. As her half-guardian, Li Yi felt that he had the right and obligation to control the direction of her life and not let her go astray. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain to Rui. After a while, Mississippi Lu's figure was about to disappear. Li Yi hurriedly shouted, slow down, wait for me. Hey, don't fly. Chapter 485. There were all sorts of people in the brothels, and all sorts of people mixed together. The government often neglected to discipline them, causing the brothels to be abnormally chaotic. Even some of the brothels in the capital city could not avoid becoming a place of filth. There were countless robbers and prostitutes. At this time, outside the capital city, there was a large brothel. Although the flow of people was endless, it was still orderly. Even the most ferocious idlers and ruffians in the vicinity didn't dare to cause trouble here. Ever since the leader of a small gang in the city made a move on a female performer in this brothel, his legs were broken and he was thrown outside the brothel. That small gang wanted to take revenge, but they only spread the news. Before they could put it into action, dozens of people in the gang were tied up like dumplings and hung on the wall overnight. For a time, all the ruffians and idlers in the city turned pale when they heard the word brothel. Heroine Lu. Hello, Miss Lu. Greetings, Heroine Lu. Li Yi followed behind Mississippi Lu. Along the way, he was dumbfounded. Before they even stepped into the brothel, countless people greeted Mississippi Lu. Regardless of gender, age, or gender, they all looked at her with respect. If it were not for the fact that the arena was still there, with two people moving around on the stage, and Lu Mang guarding below the stage, ready to rescue them at any time, Li Yi would have thought that he had come to the wrong place. What was going on? Although back in Qing and Prefecture, Mississippi Lu was quite famous in the brothel, it was not to this extent. With a command, no, there was no need for a command, the martial artists all bowed down to her. How was this heroine Lu? This was clearly the attitude of the leader of the martial world. Greetings, leader. It was not until a middle-aged woman with a sword on her back bowed to Mississippi Lu that Li Yi could not hold it in any longer. What is going on? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, I still have things to do. You can find a place to play. After that, she left with the other women, quickly disappearing from Li Yi's sight. In a simple brothel, Li Yi looked at a middle-aged man and asked with a frown, Tell me, what happened these past few days? A bitter smile appeared on Lu Luo's face as he said, Milord, it's like this. A few days ago, Miss Lu Meng. After listening to Lu Luo's story, Li Yi was momentarily in disbelief. In just a few days, Mississippi Lu had already established her own faction here. Although the core members, such as Yang Liuqing, had followed her since she was in Qing and Prefecture, the number of people in the Lu Alliance had already reached nearly 100, several times more than before. Most of them were women. Not only that, but Mississippi Lu had also used her unparalleled strength to establish an absolute prestige in the hearts of the martial artists who frequented the brothel. In the martial arts world, strength was always respected. In a short period of time, there were countless heroes who wanted to join the Lu Alliance. If it wasn't for the strict selection of the Lu Alliance's members, it would have become an extremely large organization. What does she want? Li Yi's face was full of surprise. Could it be that she was now preparing for the future? She was first recruiting people, and when the time was right, she would immediately rise up and take over the mountain to realize her great dream of becoming the king of mountain bandits. Lu Luo explained, Miss Lu actually didn't ask those people to do anything. The reason why they're fighting so hard to join the Lu Alliance is because as long as they become a member, they can receive personal guidance from Miss Lu. Everyone knows that Miss Lu's martial arts are extraordinary. I'm afraid there's no one below the Grandmaster level who can match her. How could they let go of this opportunity? Li Yi looked outside and finally understood what Mississippi Lu had been busy with these past few days. At this time, he heard Lu Luo speak again. Miss Lu establishing the Lu Alliance will only bring us benefits and no harm. Recently, there's an important matter that I'm not sure about. Li Yi retracted his gaze and looked at him, asking, What is it? Our hero ranking list ranks all the famous masters in the world. Although we'll definitely miss out on some unknown masters, it's not a big deal. However, there are many masters in the martial arts world. No matter what the ranking is, there will always be people who are dissatisfied. Thus, recently, there have been people who have been suggesting that we should imitate the return of the Condor heroes and hold a hero competition. We'll invite all the masters in the world to have a large-scale competition, and the final winner will be the chief of the martial arts world. Lu Luo frowned and said, This happened too suddenly, and we didn't have any plans for it. I'm worried that someone with ulterior motives is adding fuel to the fire. After our investigation these past few days, we've found some clues. A thoughtful expression appeared on Li Yi's face. If there really was someone behind this, their goal must be the position of the chief of the martial arts world. After all, this title represented more than just glory. If he really became the acknowledged chief of the martial arts world, how much influence would he have? After a moment, he nodded and said, That's a good idea. This. Lu Luo looked at him in surprise. Li Yi looked at him and said, Since they want to do it, then let's do it. We can also increase the fame of the brothel in the martial arts world. But if the chief of the martial arts world really falls into the hands of someone with ulterior motives? Lu Luo opened his mouth and saw Li Yi looking at him with a smile. Suddenly, he seemed to have understood something. After a moment, he couldn't help but smile and nodded. I understand. I'll leave this matter to you, Li Yi said with a smile. Don't worry, sir. There won't be any mistakes. Lu Luo nodded. That battle just now was quite interesting. It's worth watching. Of course. After all, he's an expert on the heaven list. It's not easy to see him. That's not necessarily true. I heard that in a few days, there will be a hero competition, inviting all the heroes in the world. At that time, let alone the experts on the heaven list, I'm afraid we'll be able to see a battle between grandmasters. Stop dreaming. How many grandmasters are there in the martial arts world? How many of them have you met? How could they participate in such a competition? That's not necessarily true. After all, they're going to elect the chief of the martial arts world. Even grandmasters might not be able to sit still. But where did you hear about the hero competition? Why haven't I heard anything about it? When Li Yi walked out, it was a break in the arena. The crowd gathered and talked loudly. Not long after, Lu Luo walked up to the stage and made an announcement. After a moment of silence, the crowd exploded into an uproar. What? Mr. Lu, are you serious? They're really going to hold the hero competition in 2 months? Oh my God, there's going to be a big show this time. I thought it was just a rumor. I didn't expect it to be true. With their influence, if this news gets out, I'm afraid the entire martial arts world will be turned upside down. Lu Luo's announcement immediately caused an uproar in the crowd, delaying the competition that was about to take place. However, this was no longer important to the crowd. The hero competition was not a rumor. It would be a rare event in the martial arts world. If they were lucky enough to witness it, they would have no regrets in their lives. From that moment on, countless people wished that tomorrow was 2 months later. In the midst of the uproar and discussion, the two men in blue looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, they retreated from the crowd. Lu Luo stood on the arena and watched them leave quietly with a smile on his face. Chapter 486. The Hero Competition. Mississippi Lu leaned against the door with her sword in her arms. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "What on earth do you want to do? Don't you think it's fun to be the chief of Wulin?" Li Yi said without raising his head as he was organizing the new mathematics textbook. "Chief of Wulin? You?" Mississippi Lu's tone clearly expressed her attitude. "Of course, not me." Li Yi knew his own capabilities very well. He raised his head to look at her and said, "I still have you. What's so good about being the chief of Lu League? The chief of Wulin is more domineering." "It'll make me look better," Mississippi Lu frowned slightly. Although she was also tempted by this suggestion, she didn't think she could defeat a guru as she hadn't touched the threshold of that realm yet. If there really was a master like the Taoist nun she met last time, wouldn't all her efforts in these days be in vain? A person's power was extremely limited, especially after experiencing a certain incident. She had a deeper understanding of this principle. That position was very important and couldn't fall into the hands of others. Because Li Yi didn't tell her about this in advance, she looked at him with some dissatisfaction and turned to walk out of the door. The weather today wasn't very hot. The maids of the Li family swept the courtyard over and over again. The pillars outside were wiped over and over again. Not a single leaf or dust was allowed to fall. Whether they could get their allowance back or not depended on their performance in the future. In the shade under a big tree, second granduncle was lying on a rocking chair in the courtyard with his eyelids drooping. Occasionally, he turned over and the rocking chair under him began to rock. It looked quite comfortable. The mottled sunlight fell through the leaves, bringing a trace of warmth. The moment the warmth dissipated, the old man opened his eyes and looked at Mississippi Lu, who was standing in front of him. He asked lazily, "Little girl Rui, what's wrong?" Compared to the written test that attracted the attention of the entire capital city a few days ago, the people of the capital city paid less attention to today's wushu test. Even the officials in the imperial court did not pay too much attention to this. However, the military generals in the imperial court regarded these two competitions with great importance. After all, they had already won the written examination. If they lost the combat examination, they would be embarrassed. However, at this moment, around a huge sand table, the old generals were looking at the situation on it. They were not worried about winning or losing, but because of something else. "Was he really taught by you?" The few elders looked at old General Shui and asked. Old General Shui was also surprised. He was the one who had taught Li Xian, but that was a long time ago. Even he had never heard of the methods that Li Xian had used. Could it be that he had misjudged him? This little fellow's attainments in the art of war had far exceeded his imagination. The forehead of the young man from the Qi kingdom was already covered in sweat. He felt that today's battle was the strangest he had ever encountered in his life. The opponent's methods were so mysterious that he had never seen anything like it. Fortunately, the scene before him was just a simulation. If the Qi and Jing kingdoms were to fight, the soldiers of the Qi kingdom would definitely be at a disadvantage on the battlefield. The young man took a deep breath and raised his head to look at Li Xian. What's the use of playing such tricks? If you have the guts, do you dare to fight me fair and square? Li Xian glanced at him and said, the art of war is the art of deception. The art of war lies in the ever-changing. If this was on the battlefield, you would have died 8 or 10 times over. What chance would there be for you to fight fair and square? Old General Xuan nodded and looked at the few old generals. He stroked his beard and said, what do you think? The student that I have taught is not bad, right? The art of war is the art of deception. Impressive. With just one sentence, you have pointed out the essence of the art of war. A red-faced old general looked at old General Xue and said, Old Xue, how many years have you been studying? How can you say such words? Emperor Jing looked at the situation in front of him and a strange light appeared in his eyes. He said, my two beloved ministers, please be quiet for now. If there's anything, we can talk about it later. Although the two old generals wanted to discuss their life ideals on the spot, since His Majesty had spoken, they could only look at each other. They snorted coldly and continued to look at the sand table. Fair and square. Are you sure? Li Xian looked at the young man from the Qi kingdom and confirmed again. Don't tell me you don't dare. The young man snorted coldly and secretly rejoiced. This person was indeed provoked by his method of provocation. He could win this round. Why wouldn't I dare? Li Xian said calmly. The few old generals heard this and frowned at the same time. The battlefield was not a place that cared about being fair and square. Victory was the only goal. Using the least cost to defeat the opponent was what a general needed to consider. In a situation where they had the upper hand, they had to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots in one go. What was there to talk about being fair and square? It was simply courting death. The young man from the Qi kingdom sneered in his heart and quickly made some arrangements. He looked at Li Xian and said, please. Li Xian threw a small flag in his hand on the sand table and clapped his hands. He said, all of you have been annihilated. What's the point of competing? The young man was stunned for a moment and then said angrily, why? Don't think that you can be unreasonable just because this is the Jing kingdom. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by the world? Because we have Tianfa. Li Xian said seriously. The young man from the Qi kingdom's face froze. Didn't you say that it was fair and square? You're right. On the battlefield, we won't use so many tricks because we have Tianfa. Li Xian looked at him indifferently and said, but you don't. We have Tianfa, you don't have, no. The young man from the Qi kingdom's face was lifeless. His face quickly turned red and he felt as if someone had stabbed him in the chest. This sentence made so much sense that he was speechless. In fact, it was because of the terrifying Tianfa that he would stand here and use such a method to compete with the Jing kingdom. He just wanted to save a little face for the Qi kingdom. Now it seemed that this dream had been shattered. Xian, you did well today. Emperor Jing patted Li Xian's shoulder and said with relief after the people from the Qi kingdom left dejectedly. Li Xian touched his head embarrassedly and seemed to remember something. He immediately took out something and said, Xian has something to give to Uncle Emperor. Seeing his solemn expression, Emperor Jing was a little curious and said with a smile, then Uncle Emperor should take a good look at it. He took the thin booklet from Li Xian's hands. The cover and the title page were both blank. After flipping it open, there were words written on it. War is a matter of national importance. It is a place of life and death. It is the way of survival. It cannot be ignored. Emperor Jing read and then said with some surprise, a book on war? Hearing these two words, the old general's spirits were clearly shaken. As the emperor of a country, Emperor Jing naturally knew the way of war. But he was certainly not as good as the old general's present. After glancing at it, he handed it to old General Shui and said, "My beloved Shui, take a look." Old General Shui eagerly received the book. After a few glances, his eyes lit up. He glanced at the old general's out of the corner of his eye and quickly hid it. He looked at Li Xian and asked, "What is the name of this book? Who wrote it? Why have I never heard of it?" Li Xian looked at old General Shui and said calmly, "This book was written by me and the Earl of Cheng and Li Yi. It has not been named yet. Naturally, you have not seen it before." When the old generals heard this, they could not help but laugh. They had been fighting all their lives and did not dare to say that they were qualified to write a book on war. They just thought that he was fooling around. It took a while for old General Shui to finish reading all the contents. He closed it calmly and handed it to the others. Before they had time to open it, he quickly walked up to Li Xian and put his arm around his shoulder. He asked in a low voice, "To be honest, how do I usually treat you?" Chapter 487. Li Xian was a little stunned by old General Shui's sudden question. He subconsciously recalled what had happened before. After the princes and descendants of the generals left school, he was the only one left in the empty hall by old General Shui. He struggled to read through the books on the art of war. He could only return after he understood the meaning of every sentence. Every time he tested everyone, his questions were always much more difficult than the others. When he fought with the king of Shu, he and the other generals laughed and watched the show. Thinking about it, old General Shui's previous treatment of him was actually not bad. He sighed and said against his will, "I am indebted to old General Shui for taking care of me. Li Xian will remember it." Old General Shui clearly did not hear the emotion in his voice and laughed. He looked at him and said, "Look, you and that Li brat are still young and have never been on the battlefield. Although it is not easy to write such a military book, there must be many flaws. How about this, let this old man bring this book back and help you fix it. I do not need any reward. When the time comes, you just need to add my name at the end. What do you think?" "Nonsense. Old Shui, you are so shameless." Before Li Xian could reply, the red-faced general's voice came from behind. He looked at old General Shui with disdain and said, "Do you think you can fix such a peerless work?" Old General Shui's face darkened. For a moment, he forgot that Emperor Jing was still present. He said angrily, "Ma, stop talking nonsense. Do you dare to go out and fight with me? If one could fight, one should never talk." This was the truth that the general family had always followed. This time, the red-faced general ignored old General Shui and said, "Old Shui is shameless. Crown Prince, you do not need to take him seriously. I remember that your highness was tortured by him in the past." Li Xian nodded in agreement. However, he saw that old General Ma's face was also filled with excitement. He looked at Li Xian and said, "Your highness, do you still remember that when you were young, I carried you in my arms? Once, when you fought with the king of Shu, I also helped you." "Old General Ma means?" Li Xian asked tentatively. The red-faced general waved his hand and said, "This old man will help you fix this military book. Old Shui, in order to leave your name on this book, you are even shameless. Aren't you ashamed?" "Ah, Ma, you still have the cheek to say that? If you say you are the second most shameless person, who would dare to call themselves the first? You two shameless fellows, stop fighting. The combined age of the two of you is already more than 100 years old, and you actually want to take advantage of two juniors. This old man only has one thing to say, can you count me in?" Emperor Jing helplessly rubbed his eyebrows as he looked at the old generals fighting over a military book. If he was not present, they would have already started fighting. Could it be that there was something special about that military book? Old generals, stop fighting. Li Xian began to regret that he did not find a private occasion to take out this book. He hurriedly said, this book, is mostly the work of the County Earl of Cheng and If you want to fix it, you still need to get his permission. Anyway, Li Yi was not here now. This problem was temporarily thrown to him. This was the best solution. After fighting for so long, the main character was not here. The old generals gradually stopped fighting. They looked back and saw Emperor Jing. After a moment of shock, they immediately said, "Your Highness, please forgive me for my impoliteness." Emperor Jing waved his hand. He did not mind this matter. Anyway, it was not the first time they had impoliteness. He said, "What do you think of this book?" "Wonderful." Old General Shui said loudly. "Exquisite beyond compare." The red-faced old general added, "Your Highness, I can speak frankly. The significance of this military book far surpasses all the military books in our country. If the people of Qi have never seen such a military book, it will have a miraculous effect on the battlefield." The general said seriously. Emperor Jing looked at Li Xian and asked suspiciously, "This military book, was it really written by you and Li Yi?" "It was a few days ago at noon. It was hotter than usual. That day, County Earl Li and I were drinking and chatting merrily. We happened to talk about the art of war." Li Xian used an hour to briefly describe how this unique book came into being. At the end, he added, "Of course, most of it was written by Li Yi. I only played an important role." His role was indeed very important. If he had not pointed out the wrong word, this book that was good enough to be passed down to future generations would have an unerasable flaw. That would be a pity. Li Xian nodded and said so in his heart. "This book has not been named?" Old General Shui frowned. "Not really." Li Xian thought for a moment and said, "How about we call it Li Zi's Art of War?" Li Zi? Emperor Jing was stunned and rubbed his eyebrows again. The old generals' faces were full of black lines. Did he really think that a county earl and an heir could be called at the Z? Since ancient times, how many people could be called at the Z? Not to mention that Li Yi was now a county earl. Even if he became a county marquis or a county duke, he could not be called this. Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the Jingjing Hall with relief. Old General Shui sighed and said, "I have said long ago that it is most suitable for that boy to enter the Ministry of War." "What a pity, what a pity," Emperor Jing shook his head and said, "with the talent he has shown so far, which of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries cannot he enter? But he wants to be an idle lord. If he does not want to, even if I force him, it will be useless." Old General Shui quickly said, "Li Zi's temperament is a bit lazy, but he can always stand up to share your Majesty's burden at the critical moment. It is enough to show that he is loyal to your Majesty and to the Jing Kingdom." Loyal? Emperor Jing almost couldn't help but tell old General Shui what conditions he had used to make him stand up. Emperor Jing stopped thinking about this matter and asked again, "Is tomorrow's competition arranged?" "If it is just a competition between the younger generation, a few sons of the generals can do it." Old General Shui said, "Let them be the top scholar. They are all good at fighting." The people of the Qi Kingdom limited the wushu test to young talents. This meant that no matter if it was a battle simulation or a martial arts competition, they could not participate. Of course, the masters in the palace were also restricted. But there was no need to worry about the last match. If the sons of the generals failed, there were many young masters in the palace. In any case, the people of the Qi Kingdom could not win that match. Emperor Jing nodded and looked out of the hall. After the last match of the wushu test ended, the envoy of the Qi Kingdom had no more chances. They had won against the Qi Kingdom in succession. This was a grand occasion that had not happened in decades. At this point, the morale of the people of the Jing Kingdom would be greatly boosted. If he could eliminate this threat for the Jing Kingdom while he was still alive, he would have no regrets. In the courtyard of the Qi Kingdom's envoy in the office of the Grand Herald, the young man's face was ashen. The faces of the envoys in the capital were not good either. A middle-aged man in a blue robe said with a gloomy face, "We have already lost the theory test and the wushu test. We can only win the next match. We cannot lose." An envoy reminded, "Don't forget that this is the imperial city of the Jing Kingdom. There are many masters in the palace. The next match. How can we win? A trace of viciousness appeared on the face of the man in the blue robe. He said, "Don't worry." When the third prince left, he had already made arrangements. Chapter 488. Hearing the blue-robed man say that the third prince had already made arrangements for his departure, everyone looked at each other. Their faces were filled with joy, and they finally felt relieved. Since it was the third prince's arrangement, they had nothing to say. They just had to see who won and who lost. Not long after, everyone dispersed. The blue-robed man returned to his room without a word. He raised his head and saw two figures standing in the hall. His expression immediately changed, and he closed the door. He turned around and bowed, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, purple-robed messenger. Has everything been arranged?" The purple-robed man looked at him and asked. Replying emissary, "Everything has been arranged." The blue-robed man quickly nodded and said, "Tomorrow is the second round of the examination against the Jing Kingdom. When the time comes, Your Highness can follow the envoy into the palace." "Your Highness's status." The purple-robed man spoke again. "The third prince has already made arrangements for this. There is no need to worry about anyone else. As for the court of the Jing Kingdom, they will not question us too much during the examination." The blue-robed man explained. He then hesitated. "However, the two countries have already limited the competition to the young talents. Your Highness, I'm afraid. Your Highness will make arrangements for this. You may leave." The purple-robed man waved his hand. The blue-robed man immediately left, but he did not go far. He sat at a stone table in the middle of the courtyard, paying attention to what was going on. After the blue-robed man left, the purple-robed man spoke again. "Your Highness, the palace is heavily guarded. The Emperor has many highly skilled fighters by his side. Your Highness, you must be careful tomorrow." The middle-aged Taoist nun in the loose Taoist robe naturally knew that the imperial palace was heavily guarded and that there were many masters. Even though she was a grand master, it was impossible for her to sneak in without making a sound. She did not answer directly, but after a while, she asked about another matter. "These 2 days, the believers in the capital have been talking about the Empress of Heaven?" The purple-clothed man's expression froze, and he immediately said, "Yes, on that day, there were nearly 100 people who saw the Empress of Heaven. It was impossible to hide it. Among them, there was a person who was skilled in painting, and he drew a portrait of the Empress of Heaven. It spread among the believers, and I'm afraid that it won't be long before not only the capital, but even believers in other places will hear of this matter." Thinking of the scene he saw with his own eyes that day, a trace of disbelief appeared on the purple-clothed man's face, and then he said, "It was this subordinate's carelessness that caused today's chaos. Please punish me, Your Highness." If this were to continue, there would be a new empress in the Holy Church. The middle-aged Taoist nun waved her hand and said, "Guanyin has 1,000 faces, the Empress of Heaven naturally has more than one face. There is no harm in this matter." The purple-robed man was stunned for a moment. Then, a look of admiration appeared on his face as he said, "Your Highness is brilliant." Although the sudden appearance of a new empress brought them a lot of trouble to a certain extent, it also made those believers even more pious, achieving a miraculous effect that they had used countless methods to achieve. "How is that matter going?" The middle-aged Taoist nun paused and suddenly asked. "In reply to Your Highness, I have recently sent many people to add fuel to the fire. Everything is going smoothly. The Heroes' Assembly will be held in 2 months." The purple-robed man's face was filled with excitement as he said, "With Your Highness personally taking action, the Chancellor of the Wulin Alliance will be in the bag. If you can command those people, the holy religion will definitely undergo earth-shattering changes, and great things will be possible." Thinking of the young woman she met in Qing and Prefecture, the middle-aged Taoist nun lightly said, "Don't be careless. In these 2 months, collect important information at all times." "Yes, Your Highness," the purple-robed man responded. As he watched the goddess's figure disappear from the room, he thought to himself, those grandmasters are elusive and will most likely not appear at the heroes' assembly. If that's the case, who will be a match for the goddess? Li Yi did not pay attention to the first round of the combat examination. He only knew that Li Xian had won in the end, and had won rather easily. Once the heavenly punishment was unleashed, the envoy of the Qi kingdom was wholeheartedly convinced. As for the second round of the combat examination, he was rather interested and arrived at the imperial palace early in the morning. This time, he was not alone. The empress was a motherly model of the nation. She was concerned about the two prefectures that had suffered from drought this summer. After allocating funds from the national treasury, she summoned most of the socialites and noble ladies in the capital to the imperial palace for a charity event. Rui was also invited and entered the imperial palace with him in the morning. Just now, she had gone to the empress's place with the crown princess. This was a way for the women, led by the empress, to do their best for the country. Naturally, it had nothing to do with Li Yi or Li Xian. When Li Yi arrived at the imperial palace, he realized that he had arrived early. There was still quite a long time before the combat examination. Bored, he squatted in a corner and played chess with Princess Shaoning. Yongning sat beside him and watched. After teaching her the stone and wooden stick chess last time, the outcome of their game was not ideal. This time, Li Yi would not continue to seek abuse and taught her a new game of beast chess. Because the rules of this game were simple and easy to learn, Princess Shaoning lost a few games when she was not very familiar with the rules. Then, she quickly found the knack and fought with Li Yi to a stalemate. At a certain moment, a smile suddenly appeared on the proud Lolita's face. She moved the chess piece made of paper to a certain position and said, "I won." Li Yi picked up the chess piece that had been forced into a corner and calmly flew over the head of Princess Shawning's chess piece. He said, "Don't be complacent too early." The proud Lolita was stunned and exclaimed, "Why can your elephant move like this?" Li Yi curled his lips and said, "You don't know about this. This is a little Dumbo. It can fly over the head of your chess piece." Princess Shaoning glanced at him and nodded as if she understood. A moment later, a smug look appeared on her little face again. "You should be dead now, right? I forgot to tell you. This is a gopher." Li Yi curled his lips again and calmly passed the chess piece under her chess piece. The proud Lolita's eyes widened. Then, she grinned, revealing her white teeth. Li Yi decided that he would never play chess with the proud Lolita again. If she could not win, she would bite. If she could not afford to lose, she should not play. Let go, quickly let go, you are a dignified princess. What a scandal. Quickly let go, or else I won't play with you next time. Just as Princess Shaoning was biting Li Yi's arm and refusing to let go, the envoy of the Qi kingdom slowly stepped into the palace after being checked by the guards. The blue-robed man walked in front with a calm expression. Occasionally, he would glance to his side with a hint of respect. The few envoys of the Qi kingdom followed closely behind him. Occasionally, they would turn back to look at him with doubtful expressions. At the very back of the group was a pair of strangers. They were very young and looked to be in their early 20s. The young man looked around and there was a deep hatred hidden in the depths of his eyes. The woman, on the other hand, had a calm expression on her face. Her gaze was deep and unfathomable. Chapter 489. The Tsundere Loli was like a tigress that wouldn't let go once she bit him. Li Yi had no choice but to use his trump card, the great tickling technique. Princess Shaoning finally let go after a scream and jumped to the side. She crossed her arms in front of her chest to protect herself and glared at Li Yi fiercely. "Father said that you want to bring Yongning out of the palace." Li Yi then realized that the reason for the little tiger's anger wasn't because she couldn't take a loss. He rubbed the place where she bit him and said, "Leaving the palace is to treat Yongning's illness. Bring her out to the streets, to the brothel to watch plays, to listen to music, to catch fish by the river, and to chase rabbits in the mountains. This will alleviate her illness." This is what His Majesty promised: go out to the streets, to watch plays, to listen to music, to catch fish and rabbits. The Tsundere Loli mumbled. These. She had never done any of these things in her life. After a moment of shock, her eyes were filled with anticipation as she said loudly, "I don't care, I want to go too. I want to catch fish and chase rabbits too." "But, His Majesty will not agree." Li Yi sighed. In order to bring Yongning out of the palace, he had already paid a huge price. He had no choice but to be high-profile twice before the old emperor changed his mind. If he brought another princess out of the palace, it would be strange if the old emperor didn't cut him into pieces. "I'll go beg father." A trace of determination flashed across Princess Shanning's little face as she quickly ran away. Li Yi had just heaved a sigh of relief when he felt a heavy pat on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw old General Shui looking at him with a smile on his face. He suddenly had a bad premonition. Before he could greet him, old General Shui grabbed him by the shoulders and dragged him to a secluded corner of the wall. With a bright smile, he said, "Little Li, not bad. His Majesty's 3 princesses are so close to you. What is it about you that attracts the princesses?" Old General Shui's behavior made Li Yi very worried. He thought for a moment and said, "Old General Shui, if you have something to say, just say it. Was that book really written by you?" Old General Shui looked at Li Xian with a burning gaze, but he didn't mention Li Xian's name again. After all, he knew the capabilities of his own student, but he still couldn't believe that Li Yi could create heavenly punishment, understand poetry, and understand the meaning of scriptures. These were far from enough. Even his attainments in the art of war made them, who had been through hundreds of battles, blush with shame. This made these old fellows feel like they had been living like dogs for the past decades. "No." Smelling a hint of trouble, Li Yi said straightforwardly. "No?" Old General Shui was taken aback. A look of understanding and disappointment appeared on his face. Yes, this was a peerless classic book on military strategy. How could it be written by 2 juniors without any combat experience? He had his doubts about this, and now his doubts were finally confirmed. As for his disappointment, it was because to a general, to be able to leave his name in a book on military strategy, even if it was just a mention, was much more meaningful than winning 10 battles. If that's the case, do you know who wrote this book? At this moment, old General Shui no longer wanted to leave his name. He only wanted to get to know the hidden master of military strategy. "It's a long story." Li Yi sighed. "I vaguely remember that it was a snowy winter." Old General Shui listened in a daze before his expression suddenly relaxed. He patted Li Yi's shoulder again and said, "This old man is not shameless enough to compete with the younger generation for merits. This old man only has one request, and that is to add this old man's name in that military book. Just mention it once, he was an old general after all." His foresight was far more accurate than Li Xian's. This was the first time that old General Shui had such a serious expression. Li Yi sighed in his heart. The fact that Sun Tzu's art of war could be passed down for more than 2,000 years and still have such a great reputation was enough to prove its significance. It would definitely become a classic for future generations to study. Even a mention of its name would be taken as an illusion. Those researchers would probably even dig up old General Shui's life. Perhaps thousands of years later, there would still be people who would remember a general named Shui Wanqing who was known as the God of War, in a dynasty that had disappeared for a long time. Old General Shui had treated him well. It was just a small effort, so Li Yi naturally wouldn't refuse. He nodded and said, "It's not a difficult matter. Don't worry, old Shui. Not bad, I didn't misjudge you." Old General Shui laughed and said, "I heard that you and your wife still don't have any children. I have a granddaughter at home. She's 16 years old and has yet to marry. She looks 80% like me and has a big waist. She'll definitely be easy to raise. Although it's impossible for her to be your concubine, if I were to ask His Majesty for an edict, 80% similar, big waist." Li Yi's eyes widened. He looked at old General Shui and couldn't help but think of a certain scene. He shivered and quickly said, no need, old General Shui, there's really no need." Old General Shui waved his sleeve and said, "My grandson is younger than you by 2 years. He's already carrying his third child. This matter is settled. You've long made a name for yourself in the capital, and my granddaughter has admired you for a long time. I'll ask His Majesty tomorrow to grant this marriage. Our two families will be closer in the future. You have to mention my name a few more times. After saying this, he laughed and walked towards the front of the hall. Li Yi was stunned. He immediately chased after him and shouted, "Old General Shui, please wait. Let's talk about what happened just now. I suddenly feel that there's no place to add your name." After finally dispelling old General Shui's idea of biting the hand that fed him, Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief. He stood outside the hall and suddenly felt something. He looked in a certain direction and saw the envoys of the Qi Kingdom walking towards him. Today's combat test was a competition of skills. Naturally, it couldn't be carried out inside the hall. The public square outside the hall had already been cordoned off into a large open space. On both sides of the square were a row of tables. The tables were filled with fruits and vegetables. It was clear that the old emperor and the officials didn't treat this as a competition at all. Instead, it was more of a performance. After interacting with the envoys of the Qi Kingdom twice, Li Yi cast a glance at them and paid them no more attention. They still had to go into the hall to pay their respects to the old emperor. The official competition wouldn't start until a while later. When the envoys of the Qi Kingdom passed by him, they seemed to have noticed something. Li Yi looked in that direction again. Behind the envoys of the Qi Kingdom, there were a few young people. Li Yi's gaze swept across them and landed on the last young woman. The woman wasn't very old. She looked to be in her 20s. Her looks were average and her looks could only be considered average. Out of 10 points, she would be given 5 points. But for some reason, when he looked at this woman, he had an indescribable strange feeling. There seemed to be something wrong with her, but he couldn't put his finger on it. What was even stranger was that apart from the strange feeling, he also sensed a sense of familiarity from her. But he was 100% sure that before today, he had never seen her on any occasion. This contradictory feeling of familiarity and unfamiliarity caused Li Yi's gaze to linger on her for a moment longer. As if sensing Li Yi's gaze, the woman turned her head and looked in his direction. When their eyes met, Li Yi's heart trembled slightly. This gaze, he must have seen it somewhere before. Chapter 490. The woman only glanced at Li Yi for a moment before looking away. There was no change in her expression. Strange, Li Yi shook his head. In the end, he still couldn't remember where that familiar feeling came from. He could only think that he had remembered wrongly. He took another look at the people waiting outside the hall and finally looked away. At this moment, Princess Shining walked out of the side hall angrily. It seemed that she didn't get the result she wanted in her negotiation with the old emperor. She stood in front of Li Yi and glared at him angrily. Her eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. "It's impossible to take you out of the palace for 2 months. Li Yi sighed and said, "However, you can ask your sister, Mingzu, to take you out. This way, your father won't say anything. When the time comes, I'll take you out to play." Princesses who hadn't reached adulthood weren't allowed to leave the palace as they pleased. However, as the eldest princess, Li Mingzhu, wasn't restricted by this rule. She could even go to Qing and prefecture alone and work as a lowly bailiff in the Anshi Yamen. This wasn't the first or second time she'd brought a proud Lolita out of the palace to Li Xian's estate. Princess Shaning's little face revealed a satisfied expression. She glanced at Li Yi and walked over to hold Yongming's hand. She said, "Ignore him. Let's go play over there." Li Yi heaved a sigh of relief after finally settling the matter with the little Lolita. At this moment, morning court had just begun. Although it wouldn't last very long because there was still a competition, he, who didn't need to attend court, felt a little bored at this moment. "This is the Li Yi that I told you about." At this moment, Li Xian walked over with a few young people. "So this is County Uncle Li." A rough-looking young man with a face full of stubble beside Li Xian cupped his hands and said, "My grandfather often mentions you in front of me. Today, I finally get to see you in person. Li Xian introduced. His name is Shui Yong, the eldest grandson of General Shui's family. Looking at Brother Shui's appearance, Li Yi once again felt that it was the right decision to reject old General Shui's kind intentions. According to old General Shui's description, Brother Shui's appearance was similar to his sister's. Brother Shui. Li Yi also cupped his hands. The two of them were now acquainted. Li Xian then introduced the others one by one. They were all descendants of generals, and the candidates for today's competition would be chosen from among them. Regarding Li Xian's social circle, Li Yi felt that it was rather strange. He was the son of a prince and could be considered half a member of the royal family, but he didn't have much of a relationship with the many princes in the imperial court. Instead, he mingled with the descendants of generals. It was obvious that old General Shui and the other old generals seemed to be taking care of him. However, no matter what, among the hundreds of officials in the imperial court, other than the Li family, the ones he was closest to were the families of generals. He warmly exchanged a few words with them. Not long after, he saw Chang De and a few gray-clothed men walking over to him. Steward Chang. The descendants of generals all bowed when they saw Chang De. There was even a hint of fear in the depths of their eyes, which surprised Li Yi. Chang De nodded. When he passed by them, he suddenly reached out to grab Shui Yong's shoulder. Shui Yong's expression changed. He dodged agilely, but his shoulder was still firmly grabbed by Chang De. Chang De frowned and said, "Have you slacked off again these days?" Shui Yong's expression was bitter. He was about to speak when Chang De waved his hand and said, "Prepare well for the competition later. Don't embarrass General Shui." Chang De left quickly after saying this. The men in gray quickly spread out on the square in front of the hall. There were also palace guards scattered everywhere, responsible for the security of the venue. Seeing Chang De standing nearby, the descendants of generals didn't dare to continue chatting. They dejectedly found a place further away from him. It looked like there were more than one or two people who disliked Chang. Li Yi slowly walked over. Before he could speak, Chang De glanced at him and said, "This old man has never heard of the Sunflower Manual, and I've never said our. I don't even know what the Bixia Sword Manual is. Do you have any more questions?" Steward Chang. "You're a grandmaster, right?" Li Yi asked as he walked over. Chang De glanced at him and didn't answer, implying that he was right. Although he had already guessed it, Li Yi was still somewhat astonished after it was confirmed. Even Mississippi Liu hadn't reached that level, so he probably didn't have much hope in this lifetime. However, this didn't stop Li Yi from being curious. Although Rui had also reached this level, she was still young and didn't have much experience. Chang De was different. He had lived for so long and lived in the palace, so he probably knew many things. This made Li Yi's curiosity overflow. He looked at Chang De and asked curiously, "Steward Chang, what's the level above Grandmaster?" The pugilistic world had always tacitly agreed that Grandmasters were the strongest, but didn't they say that martial arts had no limits? Logically speaking, Grandmaster shouldn't be the end. Perhaps the next level was shattering the void and going to another world? For example, Earth in the 21st century? After experiencing the unimaginable thing of transmigration, Li Yi felt that no matter how wild his imagination was, it wouldn't be too much to ask. Chang De glanced at him and said lightly, "Grandmaster is just a title for those who have almost eliminated all their flaws and achieved great success in martial arts. It's not a realm. There's actually no clear division of realms in the pugilistic world. It's just a name forcefully given by others, so it can't be taken seriously. Great success in martial arts without flaws? Then the strength of a grandmaster is about the same." Li Yi mumbled. Chang De shook his head and said, "Of course not. There are also differences between grandmasters. It's just that for these experts who have already jumped out of that shackle, it's not easy to determine the winner unless they fight to the death. Moreover, the level of one's strength is also greatly related to the mental cultivation method and martial arts learned. The better the mental cultivation method, the more powerful the martial arts, and naturally, the stronger the martial arts." Changde glanced at him and said, "Can those ordinary martial arts and mental cultivation methods compare to the 8 desolation and 6 directions technique, the 18 dragon subduing palms, and the 6 pulse divine sword?" Li Yi's expression changed. He looked at him and asked, "Do these martial arts really exist?" "No." Changde waved his hand and said, "I'm just using your demigods and semi-devils as an example." Li Yi was a little disappointed. He thought that Mississippi Lu was not knowledgeable enough to have never heard of these powerful martial arts. He didn't expect that Chang was also an old homebody on the outside. He even read such fantasy martial arts novels. However, although martial arts are not as powerful as you think, some martial arts do have the same effect as those divine skills. Changde glanced at him and said, "Although there are no martial arts like the 8 desolation and 6 directions technique that can restore one's youth every 30 years and increase one's strength by another level, there are records in the palace that there is a strange martial art in the martial arts world that can change one's appearance. Even an old man can recover his youthful appearance in a short period of time. However, this is only a superficial martial art and cannot increase one's lifespan in the slightest." Li Yi shook his head and said, "After practicing martial arts, one's body will be healthy and immune to diseases. It can be considered as extending one's lifespan." Changde looked at him and said, "That's not really extending one's lifespan. It's not that there are no real martial arts that can extend one's lifespan. I've heard of a martial art called the turtle breathing technique. It is said that those who practice this turtle breathing technique can increase their power in their sleep and easily live for 2 cycles of 60 years. However, those who practice this martial art will sleep for many years and rarely wake up. Even if they really sleep for 2 cycles of 60 years, what's the point? Of course, this is only hearsay. At least, I've never seen it." Li Yi nodded repeatedly. He thought that Chang was indeed knowledgeable. These were things that Mississippi Lu and Rui did not know. Sometimes, he could not help but ask second great uncle about it out of curiosity, but the old man would fall asleep after a few words. Li Yi's many doubts were all answered by Chang. Unfortunately, when he wanted to ask more questions, many figures began to walk out of the hall. Chapter 491. After the courtiers walked out of the Jingjing Hall, they did not return to their respective departments as usual. Instead, they found their seats at the tables on both sides of the square. After they were seated, they laughed and chatted with their colleagues on both sides. Changde had been waiting at the door when the officials began to leave the court. He silently followed behind Emperor Jing until Emperor Jing took his seat at the head of the table at the front. The envoys of the Qi kingdom also had their seats, but the expressions on everyone's faces were not pleasant. It was supposed to be a very serious and formal competition, but it seemed to have become a performance. The officials of the Jing kingdom sat on both sides to watch, and there were many envoys from other countries among them. It was said that even their families would come in a while. A proper competition had become a group of people to watch. This was undoubtedly a great insult to them. Li Yi had just learned that the Empress and many socialites in the capital would also come here after the charity event. His current title was the County Earl, which was not a big deal in the circle of the nobles in the capital. However, his seat was very close to the front, and there was a small roof above it to block the sun. There were not many people with this privilege, and there were only about a dozen of them in the audience. Naturally, the County Earl did not have this privilege, but Li Xian did. The position here was big enough, and the view was wide enough. It was a rare treasure. It was not bad to not have to bask in the sun with most people. Li Yi sat there alone and ate 2 pieces of fruit. It was rare that they were iced. Not long after, there was an uproar in the audience. Li Yi looked up and saw dozens of figures rushing out from another direction. Many women walked out from a door of the hall. Countless palace maids came forward to greet them respectfully and led them to their designated seats. Qin, here. Li Xian waved to a nearby place and said. The crown prince's wife and Rui walked over hand in hand, whispering something as they walked. Although Rui was also the county countess in name, she was actually the same as him. She was not very familiar with the other nobles in the capital. Because of his relationship with Li Xian, she had met the crown prince's consort a few times. After a while, they gradually became familiar with each other. Li Yi and Li Xian gave them the shady seats in the back and sat in the front. Before the official match, there would always be some important figures who would make some speeches. This process was usually very boring. When he finally got to the beginning of the match, he looked up and found that the one who represented the Jing kingdom was Shuaiyong, whom Li Xian had just introduced to him. When he saw the people sent by the Qi kingdom, Li Xian's expression was clearly startled. A woman? He didn't discriminate against women, but not every woman was like Mingzu. For the Qi kingdom to send such a woman to compete with Shuaiyong, could it be that they had already given up? Are all these youngsters from the Qi kingdom here to watch the fun? If that was the case, then today's competition wouldn't be so exciting. Although the winner wouldn't be decided in a single match, and there were 3 people on each side, it would be considered as the winner if 2 out of 3 matches were won. However, it wouldn't be so easy to win if one person was killed at the very beginning. When Li Yi saw the familiar woman walking into the field, a hint of surprise appeared on his face. How could it be her? Shuaiyong walked into the field, laughed and said, "Ah, is there no one else in the Qi kingdom? You've actually sent a woman here." "I, Shuaiyong, don't want to bully a woman. You'd better send someone else here as soon as possible." A burst of laughter broke out in the surroundings. The courtiers of the Jing kingdom were naturally happy to see the Qi kingdom make a fool of themselves. "Humph, how arrogant. You'll talk after you win." An ambassador of the Qi kingdom snorted coldly and said. Although he didn't know why the third prince had made such an arrangement, he was also doubting whether this woman whom he had just met for the first time could win. So, he naturally didn't show any fear on his face. "Is Shuaiyong very powerful?" Li Yi tilted his head and looked at Li Xian as he asked. "Of course." Li Xian said without hesitation, "Shuaiyong was trained by old General Shui. When he was young, he was the best fighter among all the children of the general's family. Moreover, he often received guidance from Steward Chang. It's impossible for him to lose to a mere woman. Can he win, that person?" Li Yi looked to the front and gestured to him. Seeing Mingzu standing there, Li Xian was stunned and said, "Mingzu? She can't be counted, that means he can't win." According to people's common sense, women were born to be in a weaker position when it came to such matters. However, this didn't mean that there were heroines like Princess Mingzu and Mississippi Lu who could put countless men to shame. Li Yi felt that there was something strange about this woman. The people of the Qi kingdom weren't stupid. It wouldn't be easy for Shuaiyong to win. Since that's the case, excuse me, young lady. With so many people watching the competition between countries, Shuaiyong didn't really walk up to the woman in a gentlemanly spirit. However, he still looked down on the woman. He didn't choose a weapon. When he walked up to the woman and saw that she didn't move at all, he couldn't help but stop and ask, "Are you going to compete or not?" The woman finally looked up at him and said, "Are you ready?" "Of course, but you?" Shuaiyong said, feeling somewhat baffled. "Okay." However, before he could finish his sentence, he felt a flash in front of him and the woman's figure disappeared in front of him. Subsequently, he felt a pain in his neck. After a moment of blackness, he completely lost consciousness. Plop! Shuaiyong fell to the ground. The competition was over. Someone had just picked up a piece of fruit. Before he could put it in his mouth, his wrist shook and it fell to the ground. Li Xian was even more stunned on the spot. An instant kill. Shuaiyong was actually defeated in an instant. Didn't that mean that the woman, who looked younger than Shuaiyong, was much more powerful than him? While Li Yi was also shocked, Rui walked up and said, "Husband, don't you feel that this woman looks a little familiar?" Since even Rui said so, it seemed like they did have some sort of interaction before. Li Yi frowned. When he was thinking hard, there was an uproar on both sides because of what had happened just now. How could this happen? Even Shuaiyong lost. Who else among the younger generation can go up? Look at the scene just now. Alas, the gap is too big. The gap is too big. What should we do now? Is the Qi Kingdom really going to win this round? It was unexpected that such an ordinary-looking woman could be so powerful. Although there were still 2 more rounds, if no one among the younger generation could defeat her, the result would be the same even if there were 10 or 100 more rounds. Shui Yong was quickly carried away by 2 guards. After the imperial physician examined him, he looked at old General Shui and said, "It's okay. He just fainted. He will wake up in a while." Old General Shui's expression softened a little. Emperor Jing looked at the young woman in the field, and a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. Even he knew that in the competition between the younger generation, there was not much difference in strength. As an outstanding disciple of the family of generals, Shui Yong was already very powerful, but even he was not a match for the woman from the Qi Kingdom. In the next 2 rounds, no matter who was sent up, wouldn't they lose? Behind him, Changde frowned. When he looked at the woman, his eyes flashed and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. "Father, let me go up for the next round." At this moment, a sweet voice suddenly came from his side. Chapter 492. Emingzu. Emperor Jing turned his head and saw Emingzu coming out from the side. He frowned and said, "You can't do that." She was the princess royal of a kingdom. How could she compete with others in front of all the officials, dignitaries, and envoys of other kingdoms? Moreover, the strength shown by the young woman made Emperor Jing a little worried. Are there any young masters in the palace who can defeat that woman? Emperor Jing looked at Changde and asked. Since even Shui Yong had been defeated, Emperor Jing naturally would not pin his hope on the other sons of the generals. If the other side easily won the 3 matches with only 1 person, the Jing kingdom would lose face. Changde glanced at the woman in bewilderment and said, "Your Majesty, this woman was able to defeat Shui Yong so easily, presumably her martial arts have already reached perfection. I am afraid the young experts of the palace do not have much chance of winning." He looked in a certain direction and saw that Li Yi and the woman were talking in a low voice. In the end, he did not say the almost perfect method. If she was willing to fight, there would be no suspense in today's match. But she was not a master recruited by the palace. She was the wife of the County Earl of Chang'an. She was already a wife. How could she appear in public on such an occasion? Even if she really won, how could she stop the gossip in the capital? Even if he told this matter to His Majesty, he was afraid that he would not be able to get past Li Yi. Although the title of County Earl was nothing to him, Changde had never looked at him with that title. He even dared to beat the King of Shu. When this County Earl went crazy, even a Grandmaster would be afraid. The Daqi Kingdom has won 1 match. Your Majesty, who will you send to challenge the second match? The envoy of the Qi Kingdom finally regained some face. He praised the 3rd prince's wisdom in his heart, and his tone was naturally a little proud. The officials finally felt the feeling of being humiliated by the people of the Qi Kingdom. They cursed in their hearts. Where did the people of the Qi Kingdom find such powerful people? A young woman defeated the child of the Shui family. This was not easy to get past, please enlighten me. Along with a clear and melodious voice, a white figure flashed, and then another figure had appeared in front of the woman from the Qi Kingdom. After seeing the figure clearly, many people first rubbed their eyes in disbelief, then cried out in surprise. Your Highness. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Her Royal Highness is of noble birth. How can you put yourself in danger? In terms of opposition to Her Royal Highness's participation, the reaction of the courtiers was much greater than that of Emperor Jing. Was there really no one else in the Jing Kingdom? How could they let the noble Princess Royal participate in this kind of competition? This was simply a slap to their faces. The woman's face remained expressionless, but a hint of surprise appeared in her eyes. How is that woman compared to Emingzu? Emperor Jing suddenly turned to look at Changde. Not as good as her, Changde answered honestly. Excluding the Princess Royal, it was difficult to find anyone in the younger generation who could compete with that woman. However, the Princess Royal and that Mississippi Lou were the weirdest of the weirdest. Not only were they gifted, but they were also taught by famous teachers since they were young. Unless a grandmaster came personally, they could almost be in a position of invincibility. Although that woman was also very strong, the strength she had shown in that instant was far from that of a grandmaster. Emperor Jing nodded, looked at the field, and did not speak again. The courtiers gradually became silent, and they were shocked. The Princess Royal wanted to compete with the people from the Qi Kingdom, and His Majesty actually did not stop her. Although to some extent, as a woman, she seemed to be more suitable for this battle, she was the Princess Royal. If she won, with her identity, countless legends would naturally be added. As a member of the royal family, Her Royal Highness did not care about her own safety to turn the tide and save the face of the country. This was definitely worthy of praise. But if she lost, not only would the royal family lose face, but the princess would also be in danger. They would also be reviled by the people. When the field gradually became quiet, the woman finally put her hand on the hilt of her sword. The way she holds the sword. Rui said softly. Li Yi asked curiously, what's wrong? It's very strange. Rui withdrew her gaze and said, from the way she holds the sword, it can be seen that she does not usually use the sword. In this kind of competition, she is not using the weapon she is good at. She should be hiding it. At the same time, beside Emperor Jing, Changda's face also showed a puzzled expression. He murmured, why is that? In the next moment, the sound of two swords came from the field. Whether it was the courtiers or the women beside them, they rarely saw such a battle, especially when one of the people in the field was the Princess Royal. This kind of opportunity was not often seen. When they saw the Princess Royal's fierce moves and clearly had the upper hand, they finally relaxed and even showed an expression of interest. Mingzhu is still the best. Li Xian said with a smile. Li Yi nodded. Even Mississippi Lu admitted that Her Royal Highness's martial arts were not bad, which meant that she was very, very powerful. If she was ranked on the heaven list, she would probably be in the top 5. Even if the woman lost, it would not be an injustice. This woman is not simple. In fact, the princess did not have the upper hand. Rui looked at the two figures in the field and said, Ah. Li Yi turned his head and looked at her with some confusion. The woman was obviously being suppressed by Her Royal Highness. Even he could see that, so how could Rui be wrong? At this time, Li Yi did not notice that not far away, Changda's expression was already a little ugly. Although she has been retreating, there is no flaw at all. She just did not fight back. Rui looked at the woman from the Qi Kingdom in surprise and said, no, she is looking for the princess flaw. The princess is going to lose. As soon as Rui's voice fell, Changda's expression changed greatly. In the field, although Mingzhu's sword moves were still extremely sharp, at a certain moment, the woman suddenly stopped defending and seemed to casually stab with her sword. That sword passed through the layers of Mingzhu's sword shadows and went straight for her chest. More importantly, Mingzhu had always been displaying fierce attacks. At this time, her body rushed forward due to inertia and directly collided with the tip of the sword. Emperor Jing's expression changed and there were countless exclamations in the field. A shadow flashed and Changda's figure had already disappeared. However, because he was too far away, he could not stop it in time. Li Yi and Li Xian's expressions changed at the same time. A white jade wine cup on the table was already in Rui's hand. When she raised her arms slightly, she paused for a moment and a trace of surprise appeared on her face. In the field, Mingzhu, who was about to be stabbed by the sword, turned her toes slightly. After drawing an arc on the ground, her body suddenly moved to the side in a strange way. At the same time, the sword momentum did not decrease and went straight for the woman's throat. Changda's figure appeared in the field. When he saw this scene, his expression was also extremely shocked. Just now, when the woman was fighting with the princess, he realized that he had underestimated her. Even when she was fighting with Shuiyong, she did not use her full strength. Like the princess, her real strength should be extremely close to that of a grandmaster or even surpass the princess. This was because when the two of them were fighting, the princess was the first to reveal a flaw. However, Changde did not expect Her Royal Highness to be able to pull off such a beautiful reversal under such circumstances. Although he did not know how she managed to evade the attack, the scene just now was a classic even for a grandmaster. How could it be? Rui looked at Li Yi and said softly, "How does the princess know Tai Chi?" Chapter 493. It's not me. Seeing Rui looking at him, Li Yi opened his mouth subconsciously. Speaking of Tai Chi, he himself was a dabbler. No, he could not even be considered a dabbler. Ever since the last time he tried to use Tai Chi to trick the princess into becoming his disciple, he had never mentioned it again. So far, he and the princess only had a pure relationship. It couldn't be any more pure. As for the secret rendezvous in a small garden in the palace, using the excuse of teaching martial arts, holding hands, touching, and hugging, of course not. Husband and Her Highness are good friends. It doesn't matter if you really teach her. Rui said with a smile, it's just that recently I thought of a more effective way of circulating vital energy. Husband, remember to remind me to inform the princess after this match. Li Yi looked at her and found that he couldn't understand Rui's tricks anymore. He felt that he couldn't answer her. Fortunately, she didn't continue to ask. When Li Yi secretly heaved a sigh of relief, he was also puzzled. Who taught her Tai Chi? In this world, there were only 3 people who knew how to use Tai Chi: Rui, and him. Rui counted as 2, Mississippi Lu counted as 1, and he, who only knew the moves and couldn't bring out the true power of Tai Chi, counted as 0. Li Yi was sure of this. However, what Her Highness used at the critical moment just now was not the Tai Chi footwork that Rui taught her. He shook his head. This matter could wait until she won. With such a sudden turn of events, Li Yi felt that the Qi Kingdom woman should also be confused. However, just as he had this thought, the woman suddenly made an unimaginable move. Her sword had been thrust out and couldn't be pulled back in a short time to block, so she stretched out her other hand. She used 2 fingers to lightly flick Mingzhu's sword. Her sword was easily bounced off. Seeing this, Li Mingzhu's expression changed slightly and he quickly distanced himself from her. It's her. Rui looked at the woman and couldn't help but exclaim. Grandmaster. All the wrinkles on Changde's old face were tangled together and his eyes were shining. Who is it? Li Yi looked at her in confusion. Husband, do you remember the Taoist we met in Qing'an Prefecture? Rui looked at him and said, the one who almost competed with Rui. Li Yi nodded. Of course, he had not forgotten about that Taoist nun. She had even helped him once. Moreover, he had a deep impression of someone who could not even defeat Second Lady Lu. You're saying that the Qi Kingdom woman? Li Yi stared at her with wide eyes, is the disciple of Taoist nun? Rui shook her head and said, the woman on the field is that Taoist nun. Li Yi paused for a moment, then smiled and said, my wife, don't joke. Taoist nun is already middle-aged. The person on the field is clearly a young woman. How can, he didn't finish his sentence and closed his mouth. He suddenly thought of something. Just a moment ago, Lao Chang had conducted a martial arts literacy test on him. He seemed to have mentioned that there was indeed such a strange martial art that, when practiced to a high level, could change one's appearance and deceptively regain one's youthful appearance. Could it be? Li Yi raised his head again to look at the woman on the field. Her face was still unfamiliar, but her eyes were indeed familiar. Her appearance may change, but her aura will not. She has been hiding her aura and suppressing her strength below that of a grandmaster. She didn't expect Her Royal Highness to have such a strange move. If she hadn't used the strength of a grandmaster just now, I'm afraid she would have lost. Rui looked at him and explained, but at that moment, she could no longer hide her aura. Ordinary people can't feel the fluctuations of that aura, but those who have reached the same level as her will be extremely sensitive to that aura. Li Yi looked at the young woman on the field. No matter how hard he tried, he could not connect her with the middle-aged Taoist nun. A Grand Master expert had changed her appearance and snuck into the palace, appearing in front of the old emperor. It was obvious that she was up to something big. Li Yi murmured, "Does that mean Her Royal Highness can't win no matter what?" Rui shook her head and said, "Not necessarily. She has been suppressing her strength just now. It's only because Her Royal Highness's move was too wonderful that she had to reveal the level of a Grandmaster. Although her strength has been reduced, she still has the experience and knowledge of a Grandmaster. Otherwise, Her Royal Highness would have won." Li Emingzu was naturally not an ordinary master. There were all kinds of profound martial arts books in the palace. Her foundation was much deeper than that of the sects in Jianghu. It was almost impossible to beat her at the same level. However, a Grandmaster was a Grandmaster after all. The power of a Grandmaster did not lie in their profound skills or exquisite moves. In fact, when they reached that level, they had already reached a state of returning to the natural state. They did not pay much attention to the moves. They were almost invulnerable, but they could easily see the flaws of others. If someone could do this, it would not be strange for the weak to win against the strong. The courtiers and women present had never seen such an intense battle before. They couldn't help but be amazed. That woman could actually use her fingers to flick away Her Royal Highness's sword. Were all the martial arts masters like that? To them, this was too inconceivable. Your strength is similar. It won't be easy to determine who is better. You will definitely be injured. Her Royal Highness is of noble birth. You can't put yourself in danger again. Why don't we call this a draw?" Changda's face was as dark as water. He walked to the field and said, "Her Royal Highness, you can leave first." After saying this, Changda looked at the young woman and said, "In the next round, let this old man experience your Excellency's great skills." A Grandmaster had actually approached His Majesty without anyone knowing. No one knew what his intentions were. If this matter was investigated, it was unknown how many people in the palace would be beheaded. Changda looked at the envoy of the Qi kingdom coldly, but he could not directly point it out. He was well aware of how terrifying a Grandmaster was. However, His Majesty, all the courtiers, the nobles of the capital, and their families were all here. Even if the palace masters could make this Grandmaster stay here forever, it was unknown how many people would be able to stand in the imperial court tomorrow. Seeing Changda walk to the field, the officials were all stunned. They did not know what was wrong with Chief Chang. This was a competition between young people. Why was an old man like him joining in? Even Jing Emperor's face showed surprise, but he did not say anything to stop him. Many people were very happy to see this scene, but the envoy of the Qi kingdom naturally did not agree to it. The old man in front of them had always been by the side of the emperor of the Jing kingdom. He must be a powerful character. How could they allow him to break the rules and ruin their grand plan? Before the competition, there was a rule that both countries could only send young talents. The rules cannot be changed. Are you going back on your word? One of the envoy of the Qi kingdom immediately stood up and looked at Changda as he asked, "May I ask how old your excellency is?" Changda's face was gloomy. He looked at the envoy coldly and said, "Ever since I came out of my mother's womb, I've had this face. I'm 28 years old now." There was a moment of silence in the field. Then, countless women could not help but burst into laughter. This was Chief Chang. They had heard of his illustrious reputation when they were still children. Now, he was probably in his 60s. Yet, he was pretending to be young. This was a far cry from the iron-faced image they had in their memories. What the envoy of the Qi kingdom was about to say was rebutted by Changda. The old man in his 60s could say in front of so many people that he was only 28 years old and looked mature. What else could the envoy do? He was also very helpless. Li Yi looked at Changda and his face was also filled with astonishment. The cold-faced old eunuch who was not well-liked actually had a heart that was as light as paper, as clear as green wood, and as shiny as piercing gold, the heart of a young man. Chapter 494. Chief Chang, please step back. We haven't decided the winner yet. Mingzu walked up and looked at the young woman. Her eyes were filled with the desire to fight. Princess, you mustn't. Changde said without hesitation. It was a fact that no one in the younger generation could surpass Her Royal Highness. However, even she did not know what kind of realm her opponent had reached. Anyone below the great master level was an ant. This was simply a competition with no chance of winning. At that moment, the young woman raised her head and looked at Changde. Suddenly, she stretched out 2 fingers and tapped on her left shoulder twice. At the same time, the breath in her body stagnated. In an instant, she seemed to be weakened. Changde's expression changed and his eyes narrowed. She did not know where this grandmaster came from, but he had actually sealed 2 of her important acupoints. These acupoints were special, and she could only seal them, not unseal them. She would need at least an hour to regain her grandmaster's strength. He didn't expect her to do this. Could it be that she didn't have any ulterior motives? The woman threw the sword in her hand aside and said, "Since it's a duel, there's no need to use weapons." Changde thought for a moment. After a while, he stepped aside and didn't say anything else. Within an hour, this woman would no longer be able to exert the strength of a grandmaster. Her strength was similar to that of the princess. Although her true strength couldn't be measured by common sense, the princess was no ordinary person. This was an opportunity for the princess. More importantly, under the watchful eyes of the public, the officials of the court, the dignitaries of the capital, and the envoys of other countries, the Jing kingdom had no place to retreat. The woman looked at Mingzu with a hint of admiration in her eyes. She gestured with her hand. Mingzu's expression was solemn. The scene just now was still fresh in her mind. If it was her, she wouldn't have been able to break her move. However, her opponent was able to do it so easily. If she hadn't used the secret books in the palace to trade with the second daughter of the Lu family, she would have lost long ago. Why aren't they using their swords? Li Yi looked at the 2 people who were fighting again and asked Rui in confusion, who has the upper hand now? Li Xian and the crown prince's consort also looked at Rui. Without her explanation, they realized that they couldn't understand what was happening on the stage. It's hard to say. Rui looked at the 2 people on the field and said, their strengths are about the same. Although the princess is not as experienced as her opponent, she is always able to resolve her flaws at the critical moment. However, that woman has almost no flaws. It will be very difficult for her to win. Rui watched as Mingzu drew another arc in the air, dispelling the woman's attack. However, her moves were obviously not as smooth as before. Rui finally understood who taught her Tai Chi. A trace of a smile appeared on her face. At this moment, the mysterious origin of those rare martial arts books in the house also had an explanation. The crowd outside the stage was amazed. The expression on the young woman's face did not change, but her eyes flashed from time to time. This princess of the Jing kingdom was not a grandmaster. From her point of view, there were many flaws in her moves. However, at the critical moment, she would use a strange kind of martial arts, which made it impossible for her to grasp the flaws and defeat her. It was extremely strange. It subverted common sense and was very different from the mainstream martial arts. Even though she had seen many magical martial arts, she had never encountered such a situation. This made it difficult for her to defeat her when her vital energy was suppressed. Compared to the woman, Mingzhu's expression was also very calm. However, as time passed, she began to feel anxious. There were no flaws. She couldn't find a single flaw in this woman at all. On the other hand, if she revealed the slightest flaw, she would be pursued relentlessly by her opponent. Under the circumstances that their strengths were similar, this was simply the most stifling battle she had ever experienced. Although Lu Rui was also very strong, they had fought back and forth, so they had a 50-50 chance of winning or losing. However, the woman opposite her gave her the feeling that Steward Chang had given her a handicap and they had exchanged blows. Seeing that the princess was once again forced to retreat by the woman's palm, Changde frowned again. Was this not enough? Mingzu covered her shoulder and only stopped when she retreated to the side of the stage. An abnormal flush appeared on her face, and the next moment, it became a little pale. "Are you all right?" Li Xian hurriedly walked over and asked. Mingzu shook her head. Just when she was about to walk over again, a slender palm suddenly stretched out from the side and patted her shoulder lightly. She felt a gentle force gushing out of her body, circulating through a certain meridian in her body, and then disappeared. Recalling the feeling that she had just experienced, Mingzu seemed to have understood something. She looked at the smiling woman and nodded slightly. Then, she turned around and strode back. She did not know if it was an illusion, but when the young woman looked at the princess of the Jing kingdom who was walking over again, she felt that something was different about her. Soon, she found out what was different. She pushed out her palm, and the same force returned to her from the opposite side. Although she had this feeling just now, it was extremely weak. Now, it was magnified infinitely, as if she was exchanging blows with another her. Moreover, the flaw she had seen in her opponent's defense seemed to be no longer a flaw. Noticing that her opponent's attack was weakening, Mingzu was delighted. What she had felt just now was indeed a brand new way of circulating vital energy. When Tai Chi was displayed in this way, its power was more than doubled. The princess has won. While Li Yi was watching in a daze, he suddenly heard Rui say something. What? As soon as he asked this, he saw the woman's body fly backward uncontrollably and hit a table behind her, causing several womenfolk to cry out in surprise. The young woman steadied herself and walked over with a calm expression. She looked at Mingzu and asked, "What kind of kung fu is this?" "Tai Chi," Mingzu looked at her and said. "Not bad," she said, then turned around and walked out of the court. After seeing the old man beside Emperor Jing and the experts in the palace, she clearly realized that she had no chance in the palace. She had never cared about winning or losing this battle. However, she did not expect that she could not defeat the princess of the Jing kingdom, even after suppressing her strength below that of a supreme master. The palace was indeed extraordinary. This made her realize more things. Seeing that the woman had retreated out of the court, one of the ambassadors from the Qi kingdom immediately stood up and asked, "What's going on?" The woman looked at the leader of the ambassadors. The blue-robed ambassador immediately said, "We have lost this round." How could it be so easy? Before the ambassador who had spoken first had time to refute, the blue-robed ambassador waved his hand and said, "That's enough. What's the point of continuing?" He looked at the young man beside him. Before he could speak, the young man shook his head and said, "No, I'm no match for her. It's useless. We will lose the third round sooner or later. It's better for you to admit defeat, you." Apart from the blue-robed ambassador, the other ambassadors from the Qi kingdom all looked furious. Was this the third prince's arrangement? They all looked towards the blue-robed envoy in charge. Could he be lying to them? The blue-robed ambassador's expression changed. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "In that case, we admit defeat." The fact that the eldest princess had defeated the woman from the Qi kingdom had shocked all the officials. The eldest princess, who was a woman, was not at all inferior to a man. This had greatly increased the prestige of the imperial family. What was even more unexpected was that no one from the Qi kingdom had dared to challenge the eldest princess. In the end, the ambassador from the Qi kingdom had no choice but to admit defeat and leave the court in a hurry. At this point, the 2 rounds of civil and military competition started by the people from the Qi kingdom had ended with the Jing kingdom's absolute victory. The emperor was extremely pleased and ordered a banquet on the spot. The officials from the Jing kingdom toasted each other in the square in front of the legislative hall. Everyone was smiling. Meanwhile, the ambassador from the Qi kingdom, who had returned to his residence, was feeling the complete opposite. "Her ladyship." The blue-robed man looked at the young woman with a troubled look on his face. "What happened just now? You were clearly able to defeat the princess." Just then, an ambassador pushed the door open with a furious look on his face. He pointed at the woman and said, "Could it be that the Jing kingdom had promised you some sort of benefit?" "Ugh." Before he could finish speaking, the young man behind the woman grabbed his throat. The ambassador's face turned red and his expression turned from anger to terror. Noisy. A hint of disdain appeared on the young man's face. He exerted a little force and the head of the Qi Kingdom ambassador tilted to the side. He no longer breathed any more. How dare you act so presumptuously in front of her ladyship? The young man scoffed icily and casually tossed the ambassador's body onto the ground. The blue-robed ambassador's expression changed. His lips parted but no sound came out in the end. An hour later, countless armored guards suddenly filed out of the office of the Grand Herald. The ambassadors who had just returned were stopped at the door and were confused. Soon, they received a piece of shocking news. A certain ambassador from the Qi Kingdom had died in the office of the Grand Herald. Chapter 495. In front of the Hall of Politics, people were singing and dancing. The dancers and musicians of the palace were performing in the square in front of the hall to liven things up. The officials were laughing and chatting, and the women were gathered in groups of 3 to 5, discussing topics exclusive to them. Princess Royal Highness was very busy now. She was busy accepting the praise of the officials in turn. She couldn't show any impatience on her face. Li Yi wanted to ask her what Tai Chi was all about. Stealing was a taboo in the martial arts world. No matter what, she had to compensate a few thousand taels of silver. There were many women gathered around the crown princess and Rui. Even Li Yi and Li Xian were squeezed out of the tent. In all of Jingdou, the most popular women among the madams and daughters of the nobles were these two. As the monopoly of perfume, Princess Royal Highness worked hard and sat in the palace to collect money, but she didn't care about these things. These people naturally targeted Rui and Prince Consort. If they didn't do something in advance, they would have to wait a few more days to buy a new perfume when it came out. It was still easier to earn women's money. He didn't know how Xing Zumo's new bra was doing. If he had the chance, he would go over to appreciate it and give her some suggestions. He could also try lace hollowed out or something for the benefit of men. On the side of Rui workshop, perfume had been widely accepted by women in the capital. In the future, they would slowly introduce a full series of cosmetics. It wouldn't take long for him to become the man behind women all over the world, making countless men hate him. Originally, he wanted to chat with Lao Chang, who was a moving knowledge base, after the competition was over. However, he was just absent-minded for a while, and no one knew where he was. Several men in gray took his place and stood behind Jing Emperor. While feeling regret in his heart, he suddenly noticed that there seemed to be a gaze in front of him. Li Yi turned his head and saw a beautiful woman in a palace dress sitting below Emperor Jing, looking at him coldly. When the woman saw him looking over, a trace of resentment appeared in her eyes, and then she slowly withdrew her gaze. He patted the shoulder of Li Xian next to him and asked, "That, on the left of His Majesty, who is it?" "Who?" Li Xian looked over with some confusion. After being startled, his expression became slightly serious and he asked, "Why are you asking about concubine Shui?" Li Yi's eyes narrowed. "She is imperial concubine Shui?" Concubine Shui was the biological mother of the king of Shu. She was the legitimate wife's daughter of the Chui family, which had a great influence in the Jing kingdom's Shilin and even the imperial court. Since he had beaten up the king of Shu, she would naturally not be nice to him. It was not a good thing to be targeted by an imperial concubine. However, Li Yi was not in the imperial court. He stayed at home all day, basking in the sun and teaching his maidservants. Whether it was the Chen family, the Qin family, the king of Shu, or any other king, it did not make a difference to offend a few more or less of them. Old man Chang's reappearance had diverted Li Yi's attention. Li Yi had wanted to call him over, but when he saw old man Chang's gloomy face and quickly walking forward, Li Yi's outstretched hand stopped in midair. After a while, Li Yi saw Emperor Jing slap the table, which was rare. The imperial court officials were shocked. Not long after, a shocking news spread: an envoy of the Qi kingdom died in the office of the Herald of Politeness. Naturally, the envoy of the Qi kingdom was extremely angry about the death of his colleague. He strongly condemned and protested to the emperor and officials of the Jing kingdom and ordered the Jing kingdom to hand over the murderer as soon as possible. Otherwise, they could not guarantee that the Qi kingdom would not take any measures to impose sanctions on the Jing kingdom's behavior that did not follow international morality. It was said that after the emperor heard about this, he was very angry. He ordered the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court to jointly take charge of this case and solve it within a time limit. After that, many spies were sent to investigate openly and secretly. The imperial court of the Jing kingdom seemed to have the attitude that they would not stop until the case was solved. Once the news spread, it quickly spread and caused a great uproar in the capital city. It also made the envoys of other countries feel anxious. Even when two countries were at war, envoys would not be executed. This was an unchanging rule since ancient times. Moreover, this was not a battlefield, but in the capital of the Jing kingdom, in the residence that the Jing kingdom had arranged for the envoy of the Qi kingdom. The envoy of another country died in the office of the herald of politeness. This was a terrible incident. If it was not handled properly, it would escalate into a diplomatic conflict. The Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom had just finished a war. If another war was to break out, it would be great for them. Fight, fight, fight. The Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom. One was the overlord of the surrounding countries and bullied the weak countries nearby when it had nothing to do. The other was a legend that had been bullied for many years and suddenly turned the situation around, attracting the envy of other countries. It did not matter how they fought. From the position of the envoys of the other countries, they were very happy to see this scene. However, it was one thing to look forward to it, and another to be curious. Why would the Jing kingdom kill the envoy of the Qi kingdom? There was no reason for it at all. Although the envoy of the Qi kingdom was indeed not a good person, stirring up trouble in the capital of the Jing kingdom these days and stirring up the whole capital city, causing headaches to the ministers and the emperor. But at least on the surface, the written and martial examinations were open and aboveboard. Even if the emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom wanted to kill them, they would not be so stupid as to choose the office of the herald of politeness, which was the most unsuitable place to do it. When the envoy returned to the country, it would be understandable if he secretly killed a few of them. But to do it so openly, it was a little too much. Of course, regarding the Jing kingdom's behavior, the people just watched. As for the truth, it was obvious even if they thought with their toes. With such an incident, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court and the Minister of Justice naturally could not continue to attend the banquet. The two of them personally went to the office of the Herald of Politeness to collect evidence. The deceased was an envoy of the Qi kingdom. His neck was twisted and he died in his room. The door was tightly shut and the window was wide open. The murderer must have escaped through the window after killing the envoy in the room. However, the security of the office of the Grand Herald was extremely tight. Sneaking in was as difficult as ascending to heaven, not to mention escaping after killing the envoy of Qi kingdom. Other than the corpse in the room, there was not a single clue. The Minister of Justice and the Chancellor of the Supreme Court frowned. This case was completely out of the blue, and His Majesty had given a death order. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from the door. Seeing a few people coming out, the two officials frowned. Before they could say anything, a skinny young man in front of them took off the token from his waist and handed it to the two officials. He said, "The Office of Secret Intelligence is working. Unauthorized people should leave. Please cooperate." Although the name of the Office of Secret Intelligence made countless officials tremble, the two officials were not afraid of it because of their high status, especially the Minister of Justice. The skinny young man in front of them had been recruited from the government of Jing County because of his discerning eyes. He was first promoted to the head of the Ministry of Justice and later recruited into the Office of Secret Intelligence by His Majesty. The Minister of Justice frowned and said, "The deceased's neck was twisted with great force. There are no other wounds on his body. Except for a few footprints on the window, there are no clues left by the murderer." The skinny young man looked at the messy footprints on the ground and shook his head. He murmured, "What a pity, what?" The Minister of Justice raised his eyebrows and asked, "Nothing." The young man shook his head and said to the people behind him, "Bring all the envoys of the Qi kingdom to the yard and have someone stand guard outside. From now on, no one is allowed to enter or leave. The only clue is the footprints on the window. I've asked someone to check. These footprints don't belong to anyone in the temple." The Minister of Justice was about to walk to the window to point out the footprints when the skinny young man immediately said, "Please wait, my lord." Hearing this, the Minister of Justice stopped in his tracks. He watched as the skinny young man took off his shoes and carefully walked to the window. He looked at the window and the footprints outside, then opened the back door and walked out. He walked around the back porch, his gaze lingering on the garden under the porch. After a while, he walked into the house and pointed to another room adjacent to this one. He asked, "Who lives there?" An official from the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies thought for a moment and said, "It's another envoy of the Qi Kingdom. He's also the person in charge of the Qi Kingdom's mission this time." You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.